Call the meeting. Oh, that one? Did I just learn how to use these mics tonight or what? We'll call the meeting of the West Ada School Board in order, and the first item on the agenda is to do the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, good evening. Clerk Newbold, do we have any amendments to the agenda or additional information?
Madam Chair, Trustees, Superintendent Reynolds, you have been provided with a binder of information which I have given all of you, and that is also attached to the additional information on the agenda for the public to view. And any patron comments we have attached up to noon, I believe, and I will attach the rest tomorrow, and any emails that you have sent back and forth. And Mr. Roberts, I do believe, gave you all a job description, and that is also attached. And then I have the rest of the sign-in sheets for you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Well, the first item on our agenda tonight is the consent agenda. So I will look for any board motions or actions. Trustee Kloppenstein.
Madam Chair, I would move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Madam Chair, I'll second that.
Thank you. Seconded by Trustee Ka. Oh my gosh, I'm going to mess it. Kofelt. Did I get it right? Okay.
Trustee Rusty.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded to adopt the consent agenda. All those in favor, or is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, and the consent agenda is adopted, passing unanimously. So we're going to move on to the discussion section of our agenda. And as we set this up, I want to just kind of give us some history. On December 15th, this board adopted an updated pandemic operating plan with one exception, and that was that the criteria on page 6 of that pandemic operating plan at the time was tabled for a future time. What we asked at that time was for administration to come back before the board with a set of criteria that could provide some operational readiness and criteria that met the intent of the pandemic operating plan, which was to get kids back in school safely. So with that, I will ask Mr. Heller to come up and present the criteria recommendation and process. Mr. Heller, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Trustees, Superintendent Reynolds. So first, I want to start by thanking the committee. We had a committee of parents at both the middle and high school level, teachers, building principals, school nurses, some district administrators, local health experts, and then a couple of our trustees, Trustee Ozuna and Trustee Klopfenstein, joined us as well. Certainly, this is not a easy topic for us to go through, and the discussions that we had during those committees were certainly extensive, and there was various points of view brought up throughout the process. But the committee worked really well together. I feel like in general the committee really honored what they were trying to work on, what they were trying to accomplish. And I think it's important for everybody to kind of know we set at the beginning of our process some norms of a committee, and I do think we set those because we knew that this was a divisive topic. We knew that people were coming to this committee with differing viewpoints. And what you see on the screen are the norms of all of the two committees, so the middle school and the high school committee kind of combined into one slide. We committed to starting and ending our meetings on time. I will say a couple meetings went a little bit long, but not too far over the timeline. We agreed to operate in a safe environment, listen to each other in a respectful manner, and assume the best intentions, use our time efficiently. We agreed that we would need to compromise, that data would drive our decisions, that everyone would have a voice. We also said we need to expect that we're going to have to clarify things, expect disagreement, expect to be questioned, but to do those things respectfully. And that our job was to work toward the will of the group. And lastly, that we would not sabotage the work that the committee had done once we walked away as a committee. So those norms led to a final criteria as of January 28th when we finished our committee work, and that criteria is on the screen before you. So that committee criteria on January 28th looked like this. The first one was all West Ada School District staff would have been given the opportunity to receive both doses of the COVID-19 vaccine and the additional 2 weeks after the second dose to reach peak immune response. It went on to say, additionally, middle and high schools must meet one of the two criteria. Middle and high schools in West Ada have a case count below 15 cases per 100,000 for 2 consecutive weeks, and that middle and high schools have a student staff percent positive below 2% for 2 consecutive weeks. When we ended those last 2 meetings, one of the things I told both the middle school and the high school group was that our goal was to get to consensus to the will of the group by that 3rd meeting, and that if we weren't able to, the next step would have been to bring forward wherever they landed to the executive team for final review. The committees did come to consensus. We walked away at the end of the high school meeting on January 28th with the same criteria from both the middle and the high school committee, which is, again, before you. But I also told them once the executive team had a chance to review it, there might be some changes to the final criteria. So the school district's executive team met on that following Monday, February 1st, and did some review of the criteria and did decide and made the recommendation to remove the 15 cases per 100,000 piece of the criteria. The rationale for that change is there's a level of redundancy with those 2 criteria. So for example, if a school is at or above that 2% positivity rate, that school would also, by definition, be over the 15 cases per 100,000. So there was a feeling that there was some redundancy there. And so the committee, the executive team decided we'd remove that piece from the criteria. I did communicate that to the committee once that decision had been made, so that they were aware of the changes that were being brought forward. So with that, there's a final criteria for the trustees' consideration. And so I'll review that and some of the rationale behind that. So the West Ada School District, again, will return students in grades 6 through 12 to daily in-person learning once the following criteria have been met. And again, you've seen both of these already, the vaccine component of the criteria, the opportunity to receive the vaccine with the additional 2 weeks after the second dose to reach the peak immune response. And additionally, the student staff percent positive below 2% for 2 consecutive weeks. And below you see that student staff percent positive calculated by looking at each school's student staff positive cases divided by the total student staff enrollment. And then our case counts are specifically reflecting positive cases that were infectious while in attendance at school or to school-based activities. So for example, a student who was infectious over Christmas break would not show up in those counts if they never were in our schools or in a program while they were infectious. Additionally, based on criteria number 1, the vaccine criteria, the current rate of the vaccine doses being made available, the 28 days needed between dose number 1 and dose number 2, and the necessary 2 weeks after the second dose to reach that peak immune response, the committee decided that the district would return students in grades 6 through 12 to daily in-person learning no sooner than the start of 4th quarter. For high school, that is Friday, April 9th. For middle school, that is Tuesday, April 13th. So a little more on the vaccination timeline and why we landed on that date. Appointments for vaccinations became available for our staff on January 16th. The first of our staff had appointments on that January 16th to get the first dose. Based on the doses that were available, the appointment capacity, Primary Health indicated to us that they could vaccinate all of our staff with dose number 1 within 4 weeks. Again, that was their prediction based on the planned rollout of how many doses they would receive. There are pieces of that that are outside of even their control in terms of doses that they receive. But essentially, that February 13th would start the clock, the 28-day clock between doses number 1 and 2. So by March 13th, all staff would, by this clock, have had the opportunity to receive both doses of the vaccine. And then with that necessary 2 weeks to reach that peak immune response, the earliest that we could return based on that criterion of opportunity would be March 29th after our spring break. March 29th through April 9th are the final 2 weeks of 3rd quarter. In order to best facilitate the transition for teachers and students and to open up an opportunity in virtual schoolhouse, the committee felt that the start of 4th quarter was the most appropriate date of the return. In terms of the 2% positive rationale, our committee talked a lot about this particular criteria. What really the committee talked about was that in a school, 2% is the threshold where we start to lose the ability to contact trace. Right before Thanksgiving, we had some schools that were right at the doorstep of losing the ability to contact trace. And since the beginning of this virus, what we've learned is contact tracing is really the key to everything that we're doing. And if we can't effectively contact trace, we lose the ability to mitigate the virus. And so 2% was where we felt that threshold lived. CDH, when they were in the meeting, said that they've set their threshold at 5%, but they also were very clear that they have folks that that's all they do is contact tracing, whereas our folks, administrators, nurses, they have an entire other job that they're doing in addition to the contact tracing work. So they did feel that the 2% threshold made more sense for a school-based contact tracing threshold. In terms of some additional expectations that would go along with our criteria, the committee felt strongly that all middle schools would need to meet the criteria and return to daily in-person learning at the same time, meaning we're not going to open up Eagle Middle School but not allow Meridian Middle School to open up. We would want to move them all open at the same time to full in-person learning. Same thing for high schools. The committee was also very strong that if middle school makes the criteria but high school does not, middle school should be all ready to return, and then we would work towards high school. The committee felt that Monday should continue to function as a remote learning day. In-person learning would then occur on Tuesdays through Friday. The mask requirements would remain in place at minimum through the end of the school year. We will continue to focus on the mitigating measures of hand hygiene, sanitizing, and continuing to facilitate as much distancing as we can. But it's clear we will not be able to maintain 6 feet of physical distancing in our schools when all students return. Additional expectations is that all teachers at middle and high school can deliver fully synchronous learning to students who do need to go on quarantine and isolation. It's clear that when we bring all students back, there will be students who will continue to have to go on quarantine and isolation. We want those students to be able to continue their learning in a synchronous manner and not have to move to an asynchronous model while they're out for that quarantine period. And then kind of the last piece is that as we approach those last couple weeks before fourth quarter, we need to evaluate if there's any schools that for some reason need to transition to remote due to positive cases or clusters or outbreaks, and decide, is that situation a reason to delay the entire return? So again, we would just want to be able to continue to monitor what's going on in our schools as we approach fourth quarter. I think it's important to also talk about the fact that these are the criteria to get all of our students back to school daily. They are not the criteria once we all return daily that we would use to then move a school back to remote. We would continue to use the processes that are outlined in our COVID pandemic plan in terms of case-by-case, school-by-school decision-making. So if a school, once we have all returned, starts to see a spike in cases, maybe there's clusters, maybe there's an outbreak, or maybe it's an operational sustainability issue at a school, we maintain the ability to move individual schools back to remote learning when necessary. We would not use the criteria in front of you to make those decisions. Again, the committee felt very strongly that the remote learning Monday schedule should maintain. Part of that is there will still be that large number of students who do need to quarantine. And if we think back to when we added the remote Monday, part of it was to give our teachers the planning and necessary time to ensure that they can deliver good synchronous learning and even asynchronous learning opportunities for their students. And learning from a lot of our districts around us who have gone to full-time, a lot of them have maintained a remote Monday type of schedule for that very reason. An additional benefit that we didn't know or really know was going to happen when we added the remote Monday is it has actually helped us significantly in the contact tracing work. Often Monday is the day where we find out about students who contracted the virus, and then we have to do a positive or do a contact tracing work. When we don't have students in the building on Monday, it actually has helped us to do the contact tracing and actually quarantine students before they ever walk back into our campus. So it's been an added benefit we didn't necessarily anticipate when we started that remote Monday. Again, differences do exist in the start dates for middle school and high school. I thought you should know what those are. So Thursday, April 8th is the last day of third quarter for all of our traditional calendar schools. Friday, April 9th is an in-service work day for our K-8 teachers. So high school's fourth quarter begins on Friday, April 9th, which is why that is the start date for them. Monday, April 12th, if that remains a remote day, then middle school students would return to daily in-person learning on Tuesday, April 13th. As the committee got to the end of their work and really settled in on that vaccine timeline, one of the things that the committee felt very strongly about is that there were operational benefits that seemed to rise to the top as they looked at that timeline. And that is, a fourth quarter return does allow us to continue working towards hiring some really key employees. And I know as a board you're aware of a lot of this, but we are significantly down in our school nutrition staffing, special education paraprofessional staffing. We're down with bus drivers, custodial maintenance, and substitute teachers. So it does give us additional time to continue to try to find more of those folks. Those jobs have been posted. Often we're at the mercy of, are there enough applicants to apply for those positions? It also allows us to continue to monitor COVID-19 activity in our schools. There was a lot of conversation during the committee work about the variant and the different strands of the virus that are out there. This does give us time to continue to monitor what's going on with the vaccine, or with the vaccine and the virus. And obviously, if there was a dramatic shift in the conditions in terms of the positivity rates in our schools, or we were starting to see the variant really start to be a challenge, then it gives us time to react to those changes. And again, the other piece is allows time to transition our students to virtual schoolhouse if that's what they choose for fourth quarter. So if the criteria are approved tonight, then from February 10th to March 19th, virtual schoolhouse would open up a new declaration period for our students to request a transfer to virtual schoolhouse for fourth quarter. And then also during this period, we may have students who choose to leave virtual schoolhouse and return to their traditional brick and mortar location. So, questions?
Thank you, Mr. Heller.
You bet.
Trustees, are there any questions? Mr. Colfelt, Trustee Colfelt.
Thank you, Mr. Heller. In the presentation, you mentioned one of the expectations was the synchronous learning.
Yes.
Do all of our schools have the ability, and the teachers, because I understand there's an in-service training component to that too. Do we all have that capability to do that?
Thank you. Madam Chair, Trustee Colfelt, I will say, yes, they do. In fact, if you think about Monday being a synchronous learning day right now, where a portion of that day is synchronous learning, our teachers are delivering some synchronous elements on those Mondays already. And we have many teachers who are providing synchronous all week long. In terms of hardware capacity, some will say that they haven't received all the pieces of hardware, but I've had teachers at schools since early on in the year who've been doing synchronous learning just with the laptop that we've provided them and doing a very nice job. So yes, we do have the capacity to do that. Our teachers, I'm not going to tell you that it's easy. Our teachers have worked their tails off. Those who've tried to figure it out and found ways to do it have worked very hard. It's a different way of doing instruction than maybe they're used to. Our teachers are not going to be comfortable just flipping a camera on and expecting that to be an equal opportunity as a student who's sitting in the classroom. But they do have the capacity to. We have ordered a lot of hardware. A lot of that has started to arrive, and Dr. Barrett, Mr. DeLashmet, they've been working really hard to get those devices out to teachers to make that process even better. But even with just their teacher laptop, it is possible. I've seen it being done well at some of our high schools. So yes, I believe they do.
Thank you. Any follow-up? That's it? Okay. Any other trustees? Trustee Kloppenstein.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I did have some questions, Brett, based on just some emails I've been getting lately about from teachers. I think one of the biggest concerns is just the workload.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, currently their workload is 10 hours a day, sometimes plus beyond that. What do you foresee as far as workload with this and the transition of getting over to fourth quarter? I mean, are we looking at, back in the late fall, we looked at some periods which were frankly unsustainable. 12 hours, 6 hours, 6-day weeks, things like that. Do you foresee a return to that, at least in the short term?
So, Madam Chair, Trustee Kloppenstein, I would say it probably depends on each individual teacher and kind of where they are in their progression towards synchronous learning. In a very general way, having all their students back on a regular basis would return to some sense of normalcy in terms of a traditional planning. But we know there's also going to be this component of students that are going to be on quarantine and isolation that they are going to continue to have to manage and work through. So there will be an added workload. I don't think that's going to go away until we get back to a true sense of normal and we aren't quarantining large swaths of kids and staff. I don't know that I would say it's going to go back to the days at the beginning of the year when we were really learning, we were all relearning how to do every aspect of what education looks like. We, again, commending our teachers, you think about last March when we were handing out packets, and now we're at second semester, and a large majority of our teachers are able to and are doing a fantastic job with synchronous and maybe some elements of asynchronous learning. The amount of change that they've had to go through and prepare for and have done an admirable job of is pretty remarkable. I don't know that the heavy lift will be nearly what it was back then, but I don't want to dismiss that there will be still a significant workload for our folks. In between now and April, and again, maybe one of those added benefits is establishing here's kind of the timeline of when we're going to return, and it's still quite a ways in the distance. It does give some folks time to begin thinking. Most importantly, their PLC teams time to really begin to think and plan around what that's going to look like. So I do think the element of time does help us.
Thank you very much. Just to follow up, also, I was curious, so do we have a lot of, I mean, what kind of surveys have you done in the past month or so as we were going through these committees to understand what is the parent concern, what is the teacher concern? I mean, we do have a beat on that. I was getting, again, I'm getting like literally 50-50 in my email box.
Correct.
So I just don't know really what is the sentiment, but wondering if we have some sort of formal way of collecting that.
So, Madam Chair, Trustees, we have not done any formal surveying of our staff or our parents in regards to this. Certainly, we've done plenty of surveying this year, but we have not done anything in recent time. I will tell you that my inbox is probably fairly 50-50 as well. And honestly, in some ways it's 50-50 from a open sooner than you are planning to open, or don't open at all for the near future, right? I mean, so I think those are the two groups I'm hearing from, and I don't know that I'm hearing loudly from one over the other. I'd say it's a fairly 50-50 split right now, but that's not representative necessarily of our folks, so I wouldn't want to claim that it is. So,
do you think it would be wise for us to have a survey before looking at opening in April? Or I should say going full-time.
Sure. So, Trustees, I would say that is certainly something that if the board directs us to do, that we can do. The hardest part, and I think you can think back to our surveys we gave earlier in the year, is some of the trying to gather, why does somebody say yes, we should come back, or why does somebody say no? Where are they there are so many varied reasons why somebody may or may not answer a question a certain way, that though we can maybe have a temperature gauge of what percentage of our folks who respond feel a certain way, we don't always know the reason behind why they feel that way. And so I think, again, that's something that as a board, if that was something you wanted us to do, we certainly could engage in that. We have some time, obviously, before we would bring everybody back, but I don't know that it would give us all of the answers we really need to know.
Excellent. And just one more question I had. I was curious, so in essence, a lot of parents were reaching out saying, CDC wants you to open schools. A lot of staff were saying CDC wants you to keep schools closed. And so again, I kind of went through the CDC guidelines recommendations. So basically, in essence, we're getting rid of one of the tenets, not getting rid, that's rather negative, I apologize. We're basically not adhering to one of the tenets for school, protecting the schools from COVID, which is social distancing, and instead replacing it with vaccinations for teachers.
Sure.
Are there some safety concerns that we should be cognizant of that could present, everything from hiring issues to real concerns about, just our HRS 1, level 1 adherence to safety? I guess the only thing I'm a little concerned about partly is that I didn't realize this when we ended our meetings, but Dr. Pate doesn't support going back. And so I was surprised about that. I didn't realize that. And I was curious why, and basically it has to do with us moving away from some of those basic tenets which we've adhered to since August. So I was just curious about your thoughts.
Madam Chair, Trustees, I would say there's a lot there that I could respond to.
Yes.
Yes, the 6 feet of physical distancing we will not be able to do at any course of significant level in our middle schools and high schools. I would argue we're also not doing that at our elementary schools, which I think if we think back to when we made the decisions as a board to bring our K-5 back to school daily, it was said very clearly then, we will not be able to consistently maintain 6 feet, and we're not. We're also being very successful in our elementaries, have been very successful in this return. I will say we've also learned an awful lot from some of our neighboring districts who have returned to full-time learning in their high schools and middle schools and have not seen significant issues. In fact, Twin Falls, Emmett are continuing to see decreasing numbers in terms of their positive cases. And so we have seen it being done in our area and done well. There's going to be risk in anything we do. And I think we've talked a lot about how do we balance the risk between the safety risks that do exist, but also the risks of, from an academic perspective, the risks from a mental emotional health perspective. So I do think risks are going to be inherent in making a change. That's something the board has to kind of reconcile and decide whether they're comfortable with. Dr. Pates, I would never want to speak for him, but based on the conversations we have had, some of the biggest concerns that we have, these variants that are out there, they have not come to Idaho yet, but if and when they do, there is a real concern that potentially it creates a new problem for us in our schools that we didn't see during the original strands of the virus. And so, yeah, Dr. Pate himself had said in the meetings that if everything was just the variant we'd been originally dealing with since the beginning, if that's all we were dealing with, he'd be much more supportive of this change. But because there is this unknown of the new variant, he did struggle with supporting reducing or eliminating distancing in our schools.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Heller. I can't see your mic, so if you have Trustee Buffy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you said there was a consensus of the committee, but then I hear that Dr. Pate doesn't support the plan. So did everybody on the committee support the final plan, or I guess I'm not clear
Sure.
on that.
Sure. So I will tell you, Trustee Buffy, that we talked, and as I shared in the norms, it was kind of what's going to be the will of the group as we walk out. We weren't going to get to 100% consensus. We were not going to get there. We knew that walking in the door. I would say, and Dr. Pate, just so you know, chose to abstain from any voting during the process, so he did not necessarily vote to raise his hand on whether he supported anything or not. He said out loud he wasn't going to do that. He just wanted to be a part of helping us with our process. There were certainly folks on the committee who at the end of it either disagreed slightly. There were folks who felt like maybe our percent positive rate should have been lower than 2%. Some advocated for it to be 1. Some advocated for it to be less than 1%. But those folks themselves said the will of the group is apparent. I will support the will of the group on where we're going. There were folks who completely disagreed with the criteria and didn't agree with where we were going, and they would have preferred criteria that probably didn't return us to school by April 13th, probably maybe not even by the end of the school year. They were valuable members of the team. They provided a lot of insight, but there were folks at the end of the day who did not support the criteria completely.
Trustee Buffy, can you follow up? Go ahead.
Madam Chair, new question?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so it's my understanding that when elementary staff and teachers went back without vaccination, as you mentioned, that there was not that in-school transmission remained rare. Okay. So I'm wondering, was there any discussion in the committees about if criteria 1 is necessary, because elementary schools did it, understanding that not all the factors are different. I'm wondering if there was any discussion about that.
Chairman, trustees, I would say no. They were unanimous in their consent and agreement that the vaccine should be one of the criteria. The only debate that ever really occurred was over whether there should be a metric like a 2% or a 15 cases. There were conversations that went on, in fact, to say maybe the vaccine should be the only criteria that we use. But there was, I would say, unanimous or near unanimous consent that the vaccine criteria should be there. Now, there were folks who felt that maybe we should have included vaccinations for people beyond school staff as part of our criteria, but vaccine alone was unanimous. Everybody felt like it made sense as being part of the criteria.
Any follow-up? Any other trustees? I'm going to let first round and then we'll go back, if that's okay. Trustee Ozuna.
Thank you. You know, I was going to say that, Trustee Klopfenstein, I think that, you know, I heard a similar message from Dr. Pate, and I listened to some other medical experts and heard similar message on that as well from them, and I think that realistically, they can't support a full return because we're walking away from that 6 feet of physical distancing. It's our responsibility to look at that and weigh that against the educational risk to our students and the social emotional risk to our students if we don't get them back. So we have to look at the success that we're having with the mitigating measures that we have, the success that we've had with K through 5, and the success that's going on within our state, with other districts within our state and across the country. I do know that we have higher rates of community spread than other areas do, and that's a real thing that we need to look at. But we have a responsibility to our students to give them the best educational experience that we can, and right now we're not doing that. And so I support a return, but I also want to say I think we have a responsibility to continue to watch what's happening in our community, to continue to listen to what the experts are telling us. This variant is new, and we're going to learn from it, and we don't know when it's going to hit here and what impact it might have on Idaho. If it's like COVID coming to the United States, you know, I mean, Idaho, we got hit a little bit later than other places. We might have time to learn and make changes, and so where I support a return, and we have these metrics, I think we all need to be honest about the fact that we need to continue to watch what's happening and be able to make adjustments. And that doesn't mean let's go sooner. That might mean let's go later, even if our metrics say return. But I think we need to prepare to be there and just all be aware that we're watching. That said, we do have some higher risk areas in our schools like lunch. We have a little bit of time before this proposal. Are there going to be other arrangements made for things like lunch? I know we wear masks on the bus, but any of those areas that are higher risk, are we going to continue to do some things in those, for those situations?
Sure. Madam Chair, trustees, I would say that our next step, once if these criteria are approved, is to have meetings with our secondary principals and start having those conversations about what are the things we need to continue to think about. Lunch being, for sure, one of those pieces. Obviously, as we get into nicer weather, the opportunities to eat lunch outside, opportunities to do those things certainly present themselves. We have reached out. Jonathan and Mr. Yoakum have worked very closely with bringing tents onto campus for lunch. So those things can continue to be explored if schools feel like it would help them to better facilitate distancing during lunch periods. Schools may consider, right now we have some schools who've extended the number of lunches they have in their day in order to bring fewer students in at one time. So those are things that schools could potentially look at. Again, all of those things operationally are a benefit of an April 9th and 12th because it does give time for some of those pieces to be identified and to figure out the best ways that we can move forward. So yeah, we're not, as we've just said since the beginning, we're going to continue to have to look at how do we do things differently in order to be as safe as we possibly can once they all return.
Thanks. I have one other question, and this really is about kind of the operational decisions that are out there. And I'm not sure that the committee was the best equipped to know all of the operational things, and so making the recommendation to be fourth quarter made a lot of sense for virtual schoolhouse, but there are other ways to support these students until fourth quarter starts. Knowing that the vaccination process, we're looking at mid-March, I mean, it makes sense to postpone until after spring break to me, but are there advantages to look at a return on March 29th versus April 9th, and would the administration like some time to kind of look at what it might take operationally to go back and whether there's enough advantage to our students with enough support from our staff to make that happen? Would you like some time to have those conversations?
Sure. So, Madam Chair, trustees, I think we can certainly do that work, and I think if the decision was made to move that timeline up to the 29th, yeah, the biggest operational challenge becomes the virtual schoolhouse. We would not be able to move any of those students till fourth quarter. So it would go back to things like how many students then are saying, not comfortable, I'm staying home, how much synchronous learning opportunities does that create? How much, back to Chairman Klopfenstein, or Trustee Klopfenstein's question earlier, how much extra work does that now put on our staff to have a larger majority of their kids than maybe would happen on a 10-day quarantine period or a 7-day quarantine period, a larger number of their students in their class that they now have to not only manage a group of in-person students, but then a group of students online. And there is a real art and science probably to doing that, to managing a group of students in front of you, and then also making sure what's happening online is appropriate and engaging and all of those. So it's not an easy task. So I think I did, at one point, that question came to me via email, and I said, could we do it? We could. Should we do it? Maybe it's a different question entirely. I think the committee felt very strongly that they liked the ability to move kids to fourth quarter into virtual, and for that reason, that's why that timeline was chosen. But you're right. Based on the opportunity criteria that we have created, the 29th would be the earliest we could return, where we felt like everybody had had both doses and the necessary additional 2 weeks.
Trustee Kofelt?
Thank you. Kind of continuing on with what Trustee Ozuna said, would there be advantages in your mind to, if we accelerated that timetable even more and we looked at a March 15th date? And I understand, we'd have all the same challenges there with the transitioning, the virtual schoolhouse and all of that, but it would give us an opportunity to have a week back in, followed immediately by a week off, where there's an opportunity to maybe take some lessons learned during that as we get ready to kick it off on a more consistent basis. From the challenges that you've mentioned, from the transportation to the nutrition and all of these, do you see any benefit in doing something like that?
So, Madam Chair, trustees, there's so many ways I could go with that question. From an operational standpoint, sure. I think this idea of having students in school for a week, giving us a chance to see where we're at, see how it's going, and then a week for everybody to take a break and then jump back into it, certainly sounds really nice. I will say, April 13th, April 9th, when we come back, I don't think all those staffing challenges that I listed will be solved. We will hopefully made significant progress towards solving many of those challenges, but there's still going to be unfilled paraprofessional positions. There's still going to be those challenges. The biggest challenge I see with anything returning earlier than at least that March 29th piece is there are going to be staff who have not had a chance to get the necessary 2 weeks of that after that vaccine. I will tell you, even though we set that clock of everybody by February 13th, I've talked to a lot of our folks who have not received first dose yet. They are working their hardest. As you know, once the 65 and older group got brought in, that did create a whole new challenge on the system in terms of first dose vaccination. So there are folks who are calling every day trying to get an appointment and still have yet to get that first dose. So that would be my biggest challenge is can I take it to the bank, if you will, for our folks that they have that immune protection in place when we ask them to all bring all their students back? That would be the biggest concern that I think would arise of anything earlier than the 29th.
Mr. Heller, I hope you don't mind that I do this, but because we've talked so much about staffing, I thought it might be good to have Mr. Roberts just talk about how he saw the staffing based on the questions with the different
You
dates,
bet.
if you don't
Happy
mind.
to let anybody else stand here and talk for a while.
I thought you might be.
And that's 2 meetings in a row, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Trustees, Superintendent Reynolds. I do think the March 15th, we have, especially in our secondaries, hiring paraprofessionals is difficult in any year. This year has been especially difficult. I wish I had all the answers why. I mean, I've talked before, our pay is difficult to attract great candidates. I think we also, because of the pandemic, there is many, many more people that are not willing to work in the school environment and even consider it based on the environment. I also think that with that, any of those people that are candidates most likely have not been in a priority group to even attempt to get the vaccine initially on the front. And I think even now as we hire and trying to get them rolled in with, as Mr. Heller just said, with the 65 and over is difficult. I think what I liked about this time frame is, even though if you're talking to our special ed department, they're maybe in panic mode, because again, when we have half of our kids and we have kids that have behaviors or need one-on-one direct assistance, we really need half the people because they can be there every day and handle 2 kids. When we double that, we need double the people, if you will. And so we've been able to get by with less staff and not do that. I worry that the 15th of March is going to be a real challenge for us.
Mr. Roberts, can I also ask you, because we've gotten some data, I think I just want to confirm it. When we've had risk of exposure and they've turned into positive cases, that population that has to work so closely with students, is that a higher risk population than, say, a common teacher? I don't want to say common teacher, that's not the right word, but a teacher in a classroom versus a paraprofessional helping. Is there a higher risk there for them?
Madam Chair, trustees, I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that question. I will say that we have had, I think, of any program shut down and gone, not shut down, gone full remote, sorry, Superintendent Reynolds, gone full remote, I think it's been in our special ed department specifically for that reason. Is that accurate?
So, Madam Chair, trustees, absolutely. The nature of many of our students and their needs requires often an adult right next to those students working very closely with them. And so we have by far the programs that are impacted the most in terms of having to quarantine, having to potentially move a program to remote, has been special education populations. That's just a reality of the work that they do. And so that further impacts the personnel. As we're down personnel, we are often having to sub out lots of those positions because they're now quarantining. So lack of subs, lack of candidates has definitely been a challenge in our special education population. And we, as Mr. Roberts said, we've gotten by because in the secondary we have half the kids today and a different half tomorrow, so you can survive on it. Bringing them all back will add an element where can we meet every student's IEP needs? Can we get their service time? Can we make sure that they have their one-on-one support if that's what's in their goals? So.
And that's not to influence one way or the other. I just know that information was available to us prior to some of our trustees even joining the board. So I wanted to just make sure we had it all the same level of information. Is there any other trustee questions? Trustee Kloppenstein.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. I just want to have two questions actually. One is actually for you. I was curious, what we're deciding on tonight, what is the trigger point? So originally I thought we were just describing criteria that the district could use to bring kids back, but are we looking at a specific date that it's no earlier than this date, but afterwards then it's whatever they decide, or is it, or are we saying we're going to choose this date and you come back regardless? I mean, I just want to make sure I understand what we're voting on.
Yeah, I can answer that, and I'm going to answer it a little bit vague. So we asked for the criteria specifically. That was in our motion. That came back. When the criteria came back, it came back also with date recommendations. So what we have in front of us is the current recommendation. That being said, the board can make whatever decision on this, accept the criteria plus date, change the criteria. It's the amend, modify, those decisions. So we have flexibility. The other piece of this is, as Trustee Ozuna said, we also can have some monitoring capabilities within our motion. So there's a lot of flexibility based on kind of what you hear today in comfort from a board perspective. And so I actually would like us, once we kind of get through all of this, to have some discussion and understand kind of where everybody's at. But we do have some flexibility. We asked for a recommendation. I think you did a great job of providing us exactly what we asked for, which was some collaborative process with a lot of different stakeholders with different viewpoints and a recommendation that we could take forward and adopt, or we can amend or not adopt. I mean, if that's true.
Thank you very much for that. I truly appreciate that. And I do want to say, Mr. Heller, utmost professionalism as far as how you put together the meetings and the proposal you have here. It's excellent. Most of my questions are mostly because it's just kind of last-minute rush of emails and things like that. So I just want to make sure I'm not trying to, just prize you. Yep. The one thing I did have as a concern, it's something I had heard again, even just last 24 hours, that we're having, and maybe this is maybe not in your ballpark, but we have a system of substitutes which is a bit fragile, and I'm hearing anywhere from 30 to 60 openings in a day. Is that realistic? Is that the reality of what's happening right now, where we have openings that we just don't have the substitutes to fill? I was just curious if that's
So
the reality.
Madam Chair and trustees, I would ask Dave Roberts to come up and speak a little bit more, because this is more in his ballpark. But certainly we have unfilled jobs every day, and that is true pre-pandemic, and it will be true post-pandemic. And it seems like we never can quite have enough subs. There's always that need, but certainly the pandemic doesn't help for some of the same reasons that folks are less willing to sub. Sometimes we have subs who are willing to sub only in their child's school, not any school. And so there are challenges, but I'll let him speak more about, are we seeing a greater amount of sub shortages than maybe on a typical year?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Trustee Klopfenstein. As Mr. Heller was stating, you know, substitutes for as many years as I've been here has been a challenge. I mean, it's having enough, willing to work on the days that our people are off. It's a transient position. You know, a lot of people are subs because they get to pick and choose when they work and how they work, and not surprisingly, you know, most of our absences are on Monday and Fridays, and subs don't necessarily want to work on Monday and Fridays either. I would say during this year that it has been more challenging than ever before. And we have had a lot of unfilled sub positions during the year. We have done a lot to modify our system, so we really have a good metric to know how many unfilled jobs we have. And just to give you a little background on that is Cheryl Botkin, who's our sub-placement supervisor, works diligently to get jobs filled, even after the time frame when school has started. And so there's some things that she was doing before that would have that data go away from us on an accurate basis. And so we've changed all of that, so we do have accurate basis. I think today when I looked, we had 28 unfilled jobs. You know, again, that's 54 schools. That includes virtual schoolhouse, you know, which is a little bit different model. But I'm not saying, and I do say with the vaccine coming on and our substitutes able to get the vaccine, that has been positive. Our subpopulation or demographic is such that we had many of those that wanted to stay on as subs, but were unwilling to sub at all, you know, while this pandemic is going. Some of those are coming back. We're working very hard to hire new subs. Just last week we had a sub orientation, Jeff, 30 people, you know, 30 people in the orientation. So we are hiring more, and it's going to continue to be a challenge. I think. I wish I had better news for you, but it's going to continue to be a challenge, and we do have unfilled positions, and that's part of, you know, the remote Mondays helps in that situation and gives our teachers a break. But our teachers have, in many cases, been doing double duty to cover for students or classes, you know, to fill those sub jobs.
If I can just quickly follow up, I apologize. Was curious, when if we bring back students full-time 6 through 12, my assumption is some of the classes could be anywhere from 40 to even high 40s, just because of they're being pulled out, teachers being pulled out into virtual schoolhouse, the way some of the metrics are working or logistics are working. And I'm curious, is that are there some teachers who could lower those numbers so we could have less heavy class loads?
Madam Chair, Trustee Klopfenstein, if we had gen ed classes that weren't PE and music that were in the 40s, we would make a change. That is not the intent. I don't believe I did, because I heard that statement somewhere, and I did make a look, take a look at classes that would combine to that. There may be as 5 or 10 in the district, and we would definitely look at that. That again is, for the fourth quarter, is one advantage, and we would be rescheduling and ensure that wouldn't happen. I mean, we try to, in the high school, we try to have our class sizes at 32 as a max. In middle school, we try to have those classes at 30 as a max, and we will attempt to live in those realms.
So that's a misnomer. It's not a.
I don't believe that's accurate information.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I truly appreciate clearing that up.
Thank you. Everybody good on questions? Clerk Newbold, I have a double check with you before I do this. Everybody that wants to testify tonight is testifying on this topic. So I was going to switch up and do public testimony now so that those folks, if they want to go home, can. And then we can continue the discussion on this topic just amongst the board after. Is there any problem with me doing that? Okay. So I think we'll do that. Before we start the public testimony section, I want to just kind of set the stage because we've had some interesting public testimony in the past this year. And so I want to just set the stage for the expectations around this. First of all, the board does not respond or ask questions during the public testimony period. And we set this up because we do want feedback from patrons, from participants, from community members. That being said, the feedback is important when we're talking about the discussion topics and the issues. If the feedback comes down to something where it's personal to a person at the district or personal to a board member, I will stop the public testimony at that point, and we will stop it potentially for the evening. So I would ask everybody to remain respectful tonight. Come forward, give us your opinion. We want to hear it. We want to hear the information. We, again, can't ask questions, but it does help to hear what you're thinking and what you understand and where you're at. So we appreciate you actually coming down here tonight and showing up in front of us. And with that, I'm just going to go through the list based on the order. And we ask that you state your name for the record. You do not have to give your address, but we do ask that you state the name. So I'm going to start with the first list. And I believe it's Alexandria Lucas, if I said that right. And you will have 3 minutes. Again, state your name and welcome to the school board.
Hi, thank you. I'm Alexandria Lucas. I have 6 kids in the district, 2 in elementary school, 2 in middle school, 2 in high school. So we have seen firsthand and felt firsthand the impact of all of this that's been happening. And you guys, to your credit, I am so thankful that you guys pulled off K through 5. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. K through 5 has been fantastic, and I'm so grateful that my kindergartner and my 4th grader are having a successful, happy experience in school. My 6th grade through 12th grade kids have fallen through the cracks, and they are suffering. It is hard. Remote learning is not built for most kids. My kids have had a really hard time. And I keep hearing that you guys feel like you're rushing into getting kids back in school. This has not been rushed to get the 6 through 12 back to school, okay? It's been delayed and delayed. There's been so many excuses. I know you guys can get our kids back to school ASAP. Once you make the decision, the community, most of the parents that I know and talk to, they want their kids back in school. The kids want to be back in school. I haven't heard you guys once bring up the students today. You're talking about the teachers, and you're talking about all these logistics, right? The kids need to be back in school. They are suffering. It is not easy what they're going through. My senior has had a very hard time this year. My 6th grader adjusting to middle school. It is hard doing the stuff on the computer. They're not even learning on their days off. They're getting half the education. I please ask that you hurry and get kids in school. Don't wait. Don't wait. Once you decide, make the decision soon. Make the decision soon, like today, obviously, to get them started earlier. They need to be started earlier. And I'm just fighting for my kids to get in. No more wasting time. We are tired of excuses. People in the community will rally around, and they will help fill these needs. You can communicate through your emails where you specifically need help. Okay, in your emails, let us know. The parents will step up. Our community will step up. They want the kids in school. That's all I have to say. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Next person on the list, I believe Kim Tracy, if I'm reading that correctly.
I know we're supposed to wear masks, but I am anxiety driven, so I ask for grace on this. I've kept it on back there, but while I speak, I'm going to lose my cool if I have to keep it on. I'm claiming disability. 1 in 24 is a number I want you to remember. I'm here to say that this school board's attitude of what's good for the goose is good for the gander needs to stop right now. There are over 4,504 IEP students that don't fit into this mold. All 3 of my children currently have 504 or behavior plans in place. These were in place coming into the 2021 school year. Well, my family knows and understands that this year hasn't been exactly the same due to the pandemic. The fact that my children have been lumped into good for the gander in their learning has caused them to suffer. Do you remember my number? One of my children has been handed a drug by the school district. This child isn't the only one. Some children's brains are programmed that they get dopamine highs from certain items. For my child, it was a computer that was forced on us. My child basically became a drug addict. While there is a behavior plan in place, the remote learning on a computer made the behaviors worse. I now hold the West Ada School District mainly responsible for the fact that my husband and I had to make the extremely difficult decision to have this child removed from our home because behaviors reached an unsafe level for us and our other 2 children. We've been able to manage the behaviors before our child was handed a drug of choice. Do you remember the number? I have another child that has struggled all year with remote learning. What do I have this child put on their college application for this school year? And the fact that there is an F on their high school transcript. No college is going to accept my school board included me with the majority and ignored my 504 learning needs. What was the numbers again? What are you as a school board doing to protect my children and the other 504 IEP federal right under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973? And I'm going to go over. My message is this important. I got turned away, and it is my right under the same act to speak. Why is it that if my child has an honest reason not to wear a mask, they have to stay 10 feet away from anyone when the CDC even recommends only 6 feet? Why did the school board take away face shields when under this act? They should have been left. Yes, there are parents out there who are basically abusing the mask exemption. But where is our protection from those parents who are wanting to get rid of the exemption status totally? The right to educational exemptions are federally protected. Where is the protection for those of us who have done all the footwork to get our children their 504 IEP status from those who are wanting to shortcut on our hard work? Can you recall my number I asked you to remember? I've been told by a West Ada employee to get bent when I showed them that in fact medical releases and such have been signed in 504 IEP meetings. This was from an employee who claimed to know what goes on in these meetings.
Ms.
And what
Tracy,
is,
I
no, I'm
apologize.
going to finish. This is my federal right.
Ms.
I
Tracy, this is the-
already have
There's
an
no
open.
federal right here, ma'am. I'm
Yes,
apologize.
okay. Do
So
you want to
I'm
know,
gonna ask you,
may I please tell
will-
what my 1 in 24 is?
You can, yes, and then we can be.
That is
Thank you.
the only staff member in West Ada that my family now trusts. 1 out of 24 that is there for my children's mental health. 1 out of 24 that has vocally said we are here no matter what. When my husband cleans medical stuff with less than par equipment. 1 in 24.
Thank you for your time. Don't forget your mask.
It's in my pocket.
Okay, I just want to make sure. And Troy and Sherry, would you guys mind, just for sanitation purposes, let's clean the mic, and then we'll add the next folks up. Thank you. Mr. Benetti.
Well, trustees, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. So, we've been through a lot through this past year. And at the end of that tunnel, that light, was the vaccine that the FDA approved. And that vaccine is amazingly effective. I'll quote from the FDA report that authorized the vaccine itself, the Moderna vaccine. Known benefits include the reduction in the risk of COVID-19 at a 94.1% effectiveness after dose 2, 14 days after dose 2. Reduction in the risk of confirmed COVID after dose 1 and before dose 2, 14 days afterwards, 92.1% vaccine effective. And reduction in the risk of confirmed severe COVID-19 anytime after dose 1. It's what we've been waiting for. It's the answer to our prayers. It's a miracle of modern science. And it has been delivered to us right here and right now. And it's important to know that we are never going to find perfection. We're never going to find perfection. For instance, that 92%, 14 days after the first dose, has a larger confidence interval than does the 94.1% after the 14-day dose. But perfection is not what we ask of anybody, and we can't expect it. There's no perfection. There's only trade-offs. And the trade-offs we face are some of the stories that we've already heard, that our children are falling behind. And we have to understand that if we're going to make these trade-offs, the other things that are happening in their lives have to be taken into consideration, as we've heard tonight. Their mental health, their social emotional health, their physical well-being. Everything is a trade-off. And so as you make this decision tonight, we encourage you to make as soon as possible, actually as soon as possible. But if you don't believe that that 92.1% trade-off after the 14 days of the first dose is sufficient, or that confidence interval is too broad, then at least please take into consideration the trade-offs of our kids who are falling behind. And make sure that you understand and say, we want what's best for the kids. We all do. But we're willing to delay 45 days for a better confidence interval. Or we're willing to delay because there's a specter on the horizon. Or we're willing to delay what's best for our kids because Dr. Pate wants us to. Those are all valid considerations. And we will listen to them, and we will respect the choice that you make. But always keep in mind that we need to do what's best for our kids. We will never achieve perfection. We can only do what's best. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Clerk Newell. Appreciate that. Next person on the list is Sam Perez. Sorry, I forgot I had a list I had to read off of here. So.
Samuel Perez, teacher. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, trustees, Superintendent Randalls, participants and guests. I would like to remind all of us of our commitment to the highly reliable school continuous improvement goals and why holding these current COVID criteria, although recognized to be less than perfect, yet anything less would undermine trust, safety, and hope throughout the school district. Marzano had mentioned in level 1 addresses the factors considered foundational to the well-being of the school, namely to faculty, staff, students, parents, and the community feel that the school is safe and maximizes collaboration for the enhancement of student learning. This goal is not just about physical safety. The safety in terms of feeling comfortable emotionally, mentally in the classrooms. I'll read some of the indicators that are apropos to this issue at hand. Faculty and staff perceive the school environment as safe and orderly. Teachers are given formal roles in decision-making process for school initiatives. Faculty and staff have formal ways to give input regarding optimal operations of the school. Management of fiscal, operational, and technical resources directly supports teachers. I believe the committee did its best to follow these important points. Now, let me reiterate, this is not perfect. I get it. But keeping the April dates and also the vaccines as part of the criteria for us is crucial. In closing, I received a terrible call this weekend from my cousin in Texas that my favorite uncle, a Vietnam veteran, and someone that I idolized as a boy, was taken off a ventilator in the feeding tube due to the COVID-19 virus that had destroyed his lungs. Over a month ago, he was working in his backyard, moving logs, prepping a swing set for his new grandchild. Now the family is waiting for him to pass on. I don't want this to happen to anyone in this district. May we use wisdom and make necessary changes when appropriate in the near and far future. Please keep the April dates, the vaccinations, stick with the criteria. It will matter. We want the students back too, but not at the expense of our health. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person on the list, Herb Sampson. Did I say that right?
My name's Herb Sampson. Today I watched a news report from KTVB News 7. Maybe you've seen it. It was regarding the reopening plan. And the headline was, "It's emotional arguments as opposed to sound logical reasoning." I found this to be very untrue, one-sided, and even manipulative. Those who were interviewed in this report were the same people that stood at this podium on October 13th and used emotion and fear to condemn anything other than remote learning. Remember, red means remote. Maybe you remember a couple days later when they implemented a strike. I urge you to go back and watch that board meeting. It's very telling. Fortunately, and thankful to you, board members, you saw through that and you put our elementary school kids back into school full time and our middle school and high school kids back in on a hybrid. And it worked. All the death and destruction that was prophesied during that meeting didn't take place. You know, I never liked debate team. You were taught how to frame and present a compelling argument, even if that argument was completely false. And that, I feel, is what happened with this news report. I urge you as a board to continue to look past the fear and the emotion and to do what's right, to work towards getting our kids back in school where they should be, where the learning is correct. I can live with our kids going back to school in the fourth quarter. What I can't live with is continuing to give in to all the fear. And so I thank you.
Thank you. Brielle Thompson.
Hi, my name is Brielle Thompson. I'm a senior at Eagle High School, and I'm also one of the student body co-presidents in the student council. So I felt that I kind of am able to represent a wide spectrum of views for my school as I work closely with my peers and faculty and administration. One thing that I wanted to touch on that I feel has been overlooked or not prioritized like a lot of people would expect it to be is the mental health of a lot of the students. And I know that we did a kind of wish event at our school where we gave out hearts to every student at the school and asked them to write one of their wishes. And we were going to try to fulfill as many as we could through donations. So it could be anywhere from a candy bar to AirPods or just really anything. And I was really surprised by the amount of responses of kids that said, "I wish I wasn't depressed. I wish that I could pass this class. I wish I could do well on my final and finish this year with even a 3.5 or 3.0. And some wish that we would be in school full time, and I kind of felt that, and it made me realize how many kids are struggling with it. And I just think that there's a rising mental health issue, and suicide rates have gone up significantly. I think it's silly to not look into that and overlook that. I know that through this process, there's a lot of things to think about. There's a lot of logistics. Obviously, the teachers have been having a lot of work as well. There's no doubt about that. But it's just silly to me that I could drive 4 hours and go live with my aunt, and I could go to school full-time in Idaho Falls. I could be getting an in-person education. I could be getting the senior year that I would have expected. And it's not the same here. Same with my cousins in Utah. They have bigger districts, more crowded schools, same thing with them. I think it's great that we want to prioritize the teachers' wants, but I think that it's time we start thinking about the students and their impact with their education. It's not the same. I would say I don't learn anything on my online days if I wasn't already a high-achieving student that has to go out and do my own learning and assignments. And I just encourage you guys to really take into consideration the effect that it's had on students' education and mental health especially. I don't think it should be a wish for kids to want to go to school and not struggle with mental health issues. I don't think they should wish that they should be getting good grades. They should just be getting them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Isabel Henderson. By the way, Ms. Thompson, very good job.
Hello, my name is Isabel Henderson. I am a 10th grader at the Idaho Fine Arts Academy, and I, like the first lady that spoke, I have fallen through the cracks. I was always a very quote-unquote gifted student. In all of the schools I've gone to, I have never struggled in school. I've gotten A's and 4s and 4.0s very easily. I've been put in the gifted and talented program in all of the schools I have attended, and I hate to brag, but by a lot of metrics, I am considered a smart student. This semester, I almost got a B and a C, and it might seem silly to everybody else, but that was failing to me. If it weren't for some overly generous teachers, I would have not been able to had the perfect 4.0 on my college transcript that I had always wanted. The remote days are truly a pit. Nothing happens. I have never had a synchronous remote day, and rarely do synchronous remote days happen on Mondays. Yesterday was the first remote day my entire school year that I actually checked off all my items. There is no accountability for me, and there's no person, no teacher that is there to help me succeed. My mental health has fallen drastically, and that has also contributed to the dip in my school grades. I go to a very different school, and it's a very different community and a very different system. But I even wonder if there was any students who didn't fall through the cracks. Everyone I know, with the exception of teachers, wants to go back full time. If we don't go back full time, this whole year will have been a waste. And I'm sorry to say it, but it's very true. I've had one teacher who has actually tried to reach out to students and tried his best to provide the learning that we need. I know that a lot of importance has been placed on the teachers, but I beg you to listen and to actually listen to the people who make up the majority of the school populations, and that is the students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, very nice job. Appreciate it. Zach Borman is our last person signed up to testify. Zach, I apologize if I mispronounce your last name.
My name is Zach Borman. I teach at Rocky Mountain High School. And I want to start off by saying that thank you, Chairwoman Johnson and trustees and Dr. Reynolds for allowing us to speak our point of view. This is a tough issue across the board. I want to say that I am grateful for the opportunity. I'm grateful for Brett Heller and being able to be on the committee, and it was very respectfully and well run. I am grateful that the committee came up with the criteria that they did, especially with the teacher vaccinations. I think that is an important step, and I know that I feel comfortable as a teacher, and I know a lot of my peers do as well, going back to work and in any context. Like, I want to say, talking to multiple teachers, that now that the vaccination is going to be out of the way for the majority of us, that going to work is not a question. I plan on going every single day, right? And doing my job to the best of my ability. My character has sort of been under attack by one particular speaker here as to my comments on the news about the decision of the committee being based off of emotion. And I would like to sort of expand or explain my comment itself. And I think that there are two compelling arguments that are being made again and again about education in hybrid, as well as the mental and emotional social health of the student. And I think both of these arguments have a strong, compelling emotional component, right? They make sense. You feel bad, I feel bad for students, and I know it's challenging. It's challenging for everyone across the board. But what I haven't seen from the board necessarily is the evidence of those two statements being factually true. I think I would love to hear from the district itself, now that we have evidence, like how do the grades stack up now compared to previous years? Now that we've finished a complete semester, like, is education really worse? And if that's true, I will back off entirely, right? But I haven't seen or heard that evidence. I've heard it asserted, but I have not seen or heard evidence of that specific claim itself. And as far as the social and emotional health goes, I mean, that's a complex thing, and I understand that everybody is struggling, but going back full-time doesn't necessarily guarantee fixing that problem. It's something that honestly was skyrocketing prior to COVID anyway. If you talk to any teacher in the last 10 years that I've only been, this is my 9th year teaching, and those have been trending up for years. And moving back full-time doesn't necessarily fix automatically. And it also increases the likelihood that a lot of kids that are struggling with it because they have family members at home that are at risk or something like that, you open whole new possibilities of different kinds of mental and emotional problems with or stressing, anxiety-related issues for kids in this new environment. I think, if I can just, as I'm the last, if I can just throw in a couple more words.
Just wrap it up. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. You say
You're good. No, you can wrap up.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead. That's fine.
It's a risky proposition. Representative Ozuna had said we need to weigh the risks on both sides and compare them, and I think that Dr. Pate and other medical experts are screaming from the top of the roofs that this is very dangerous, and we need to have evidence based off of. Please sit down.
Okay. Mr. Hurst, thank you. Listen, I allowed another person to go longer than 3 minutes. I felt that was okay, and we're wrapping it up. So we're just going to call it good there. It was very good public testimony. People did a very nice job. Students really appreciate your time and coming in and testifying a lot. So thank you very much. Clerk Newbold, I think I'd like to, if the board is okay, we've been at this an hour, so I was going to see if we wanted to do some discussion around the 6 through 12 now, if there are any other questions after you've heard some public testimony, any other things we wanted to have Mr. Heller answer. Just wanted to get your thoughts there. I have one, because we asked it, and I think it should be on the public record. Mr. Heller, you probably know exactly which question I'm going to ask, which is what has been the change in grades from first semester last year to first semester this year?
Sure. So, Madam Chair, trustees, the one piece of data that we do have is the rate of Fs. So, for example, the number of students who have an F grade. Looking at final grades as they wrap up semester, anywhere from 2 to 3% increase in Fs as opposed to what we see in a normal year. So we definitely have seen more students with failing grades. Now, I will always caution that a grade like an F grade is a fairly subjective measure. There's a lot of variability that goes into in each individual teacher's grade book. Our data team right now is trying to pull some information for us in terms of GPA. So last year at the end of first semester to this year at first semester, trying to see what was the actual GPA decrease that we might have seen across kind of at the aggregate across our system for our secondary students. So they are working to pull that data for me. I don't have it at my disposal, but we certainly have seen a much higher rate of, 2 to 3% more students with Fs. Our principals will tell us, and community teachers have told me that the missing assignment rate has significantly increased during this time.
Thank you. Are there any, Ms. Trustee Buffy?
Madam Chair, thank you. Also another question that was asked that I think should be on public record was about the count for suicide attempts and completions and that information that was shared.
Sure. I could grab notes if I need to go into more details, but I hate to even say these types of things out loud. We have not had any deaths by suicide in the West Ada School District this year. I don't even, that's great, but I always hate to talk about it because I worry that then somebody's going to prove me wrong. We don't track suicide attempts as a district. We do track how often our counselors, our team at our buildings are brought in to do kind of prevention, post-intervention interviews. And so I shared that data with the board in terms of where were we through all of last year, what did we have, and then where are we at kind of at this point midway through the school year. And I would say if you tracked it on a graph, it would say that we're probably trending towards maybe less of those interviews, but that's certainly not something that's a linear type of thing to track. We may see spikes in those types of interviews. So those are the interviews that are done when any type of suicidal ideation or any of those types of things come to our attention, and they come to our attention for a variety of different reasons. And then our team at those schools are now intervening and working with either the family, sometimes with medical providers, health providers, on how do we help your student to not go down this path. So we do have that data that I shared with you, and certainly we've had our share of those this year, as you saw in the data, but we're not seeing maybe it be at a higher rate than it is on a different year. With that, with students only being in the school every other day, that likely also potentially plays a role in how many students are coming forward and allowing us to identify that there is a problem. And so certainly we know that having our kids in our schools every day is better in terms of our ability to identify issues that may arise and then intervene on those behalf. So,
thank you. And I'm going to maybe ask Trustee Ozuna, because I know she listened into the Boise School District Board meeting yesterday and the medical professionals, and I believe the medical professionals for the Valley also had some information around mental illness or mental health that I thought might be good for the board to hear as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly the questions around this and the answers are really important information for us to consider, and the physicians that were part of the process for the Boise School District meeting yesterday were asked these questions, and they did say that there has been an increase this year compared to last year of hospitalizations for school-aged children for mental health issues and cases where children have hurt themselves.
Thank you. Is there any other kind of questions before we?
I have one more question. Mr. Heller, this is probably for you, but can you tell us, what do we have in place right now for our higher needs students? Are some of them back full-time, or is everybody fully remote, or is it kind of individualized based upon the plans and how the schools can do those accommodations?
So Madam Chair, trustees, in terms of our students on IEP 504s, those are very individualized. So the team was convened early on in the year. I can tell you that a lot of our folks, if you think back to when we went to elementary daily, that triggered a whole new reconvening of those teams, because there were some families who said, my kid can't come every day right now because of a medical situation. So that constant process of reconvening that team. Now, as we have heard, and you all have heard anecdotal stories, I've heard stories and talked to lots of folks who feel like their child's not getting what they need right now. And I continue to refer those folks, so you need to get back with your building principal and your team to reconvene that team and continue to think about how we can do that plan better. We have students who are attending daily because their IEP plan and the team decided that was what was best. We also have students who, though educationally, we know they need to be here every day, there's medical reasons why coming every day was challenging for those folks. So there's varied reasons why every student is on the plan that they are on. And so yes, there are students who are attending daily. We also have students who aren't on IEPs and 504s who are being asked to come in on their remote days for very specific reasons. We have schools that are coming up with ways to bring in more kids on Mondays, even though that's a remote day, to do intervention opportunities. So schools are finding ways to be as flexible as they can. Again, we all agree, I think everybody, regardless of whether they think what the criteria should be or when we should come back, everybody in this room wants our kids to come back to school full time because we know that's the best place for them.
Thank you. Maybe just to follow up on that, does that change if kids go back to school in 6 through 12 full time, or do those IEP and 504 plans stay the same regardless?
So, Madam Chair, Trustees, there will definitely be a need for many of those plans for that team to reconvene and make sure, okay, if your student can now come every day, is that what you want? There's going to be some families who, like I said, when we brought elementary back full-time, said that's not going to work for our family based on a medical situation. So there will be a need in those IEP teams to reconvene in many of those cases and make some adjustments. Some IEPs will be fine regardless of whether we move from a hybrid to a full-time, but many will have to be reevaluated and the team will have to make decisions.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Well, the floor is yours, trustees. Do you want to just kind of, somebody want to kick it off? And I mean, I'm happy to kick it off of where I'm at, but I'd like to hear from the board first. So, Trustee Colfelt, go ahead.
Madam Chair, thank you. You know, I'm sure like my colleagues up here, I'm conflicted. You know, I've spent the last 2 weeks since the last board meeting and engaging with emails, and I think I've drank more coffee at coffee meetings that if you saw my hands right now, they would be shaking. And I've really tried to get a pulse for how people feel, and it's very, very difficult. I come back to what is an essential worker? You know, I've been in the fire service for 33 years, and I understand I'm not trying to equate fire service risk with what the educators face in the classroom. But there is a reason that I come back to that the governor moved teachers up in the priority for vaccinations. There's a reason for that, because there's an impact to our kids not being there in person. I think if waiting until April, there's still going to be teachers that haven't gotten their second vaccination. And there's going to be those that, for personal reasons, choose not to, and I respect that. But we're still going to have teachers that don't have the optimum 94% immunity. But those that do have the first shot, regardless of what the debate is about what their efficacy is after the first shot, they will have more than the general public has. They will have more than the workers at Costco have. They will have more immunity than the clerks working at the grocery store that are facing lots of people every day. Now, I don't want this to be taken wrongly that I have no compassion for the teachers, because I do. Over the last couple weeks, I've had a great opportunity to speak with the principals, and we have extremely compassionate, hardworking, caring educators. So as I voice my comments, I in no means mean to, you know, minimize the quality of the educators that we have in this district. I will say, in talking with some of the administrators in my zone, you know, it's anecdotal, but those teachers shared with me if they were taking a majority, their educators want to be back, and they want to be back sooner than later. When I couple that with, we do see a decline in academics. Mr. Heller just shared with us that, you know, academically alone, we're seeing a 2 to 3% increase in failing grades. We heard, to me, very powerful testimony tonight from Isabel and Brielle. Thank you both for being here, of the impact that it's having on our kids. And you know, and that really hits right at the heart of it, listening to those kids. So when I couple it with the grade issue, what Trustee Ozuna just mentioned that the doctors had said at the Boise meeting last night, really confirming what I think a lot of us had suspicions about. You know, as I start to put all of that together, but my confliction comes with some of the information that we were provided here recently about some of the true challenges the district is facing with 43 unfilled paraprofessionals in this special education department. That's reality. Our school nutrition challenges, you know, feeding our kids and giving them healthy meals, that's a challenge. And then our transportation piece, you know, the information, there's 35 to 40 understaffed bus routes and 10 bus routes that would have to be reactivated on top of that. So my confliction is, you know, even if we move at a faster timetable, are we not even going to be able to get the kids to school because the transportation piece isn't there, and that's entirely outside of our control. So I am very much an advocate of increasing, moving up that timetable to get them back to school, but I am also respectful of the fact that we have to be able to logistically do it. And so that's where I guess I just share those thoughts with my fellow trustees, you know, moving up that timetable some, and what that is, if it's the 29th, I'm not sure. You know, I'd like to hear from my fellow trustees and what their thoughts are. Thank you.
Still learning the mic. Thank you. And Trustee Ozuna, go ahead. Well, I don't know if you don't, I'm not going to force you.
Might as well go next. Start with some that are easier for me. I fully support remote Mondays staying in place. I think our teachers really need that. They're going to be moving from this hybrid situation at the high school level. We're in a quarter semester system, and so, you know, they have to switch their lesson plans over again, and I think that I think they need that. I do support that recommendation on the remote Monday. I also support the full vaccination process for our teachers. Our older students transmit this virus just like adults. We know that from the science. We've been told that. There's going to be full classrooms. There is more exposure for our teachers, much more than some other essential worker populations, and we have other mitigating measures with the mask, and all of that stuff is really important, but I fully support the vaccination process with the additional 2 weeks for our teachers. Where it's a little bit harder for me with the dates is that we know we have students that are going to have to move to a fully remote situation. So whether they're vulnerable or they have vulnerable parents or grandparents or whatever their situation is, we have kids that are going to have to be fully remote no matter what day we put the rest of these kids in, whether it's fourth quarter or if we go sooner. And we're talking about the remote experience is not as good as being in the classroom. So the sooner we go back, it's got a negative impact on these kids. And that's real too. And you know, we have to make our decisions up here for all kids. We have to make the right decision for all kids. And the sooner we go, the more impact there. That said, I do think that there's advantages in going back quicker, like after spring break. We could get these kids in the classroom before finals. They can get some, you know, more personalized instruction before finals. It's less time for the kids to have to go fully remote to be supported in a, you know, synchronous learning structure. But operationally, I'm going to acknowledge I'm not close enough to the operational challenges, and so I wouldn't want to make that decision for the district. So I'm leaning toward, I'm comfortable earlier if operationally we can handle it, and otherwise I'm comfortable with fourth quarter.
Thank you. Trustee Kloppenstein.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you. You know, going back to one of your comments. I think it's frankly about time that teachers were given a priority in our community. I remember there was a time when the CDH was talking about opening bars, and yet we were still struggling as a school district trying to get attention from CDH or from other organizations. So I thank Governor Little so much to be able to prioritize teachers and get them the protection they need to be able to be in classrooms, so we don't have to worry about their health. They are two parts of the equation, kids in the classroom along with teachers. The challenge I think we've had as a district through this process has been that there is, of course, the emotional, mental challenge that kids are going to have in this. It is, I wish we could turn back the clock and stop the virus at the borders when it comes down to it. And I wish we could have had a national program that would have helped us not reinvent the wheel, because when you start talking to other districts, everyone's reinventing the same wheel, even in Utah or even in neighboring Valley View or whatever. We're all talking about the same thing, and it took forever to get down to an idea of what was good, what was the right path to follow. But I think in terms of moving forward, the challenge we have is partly logistic, is that if we shoot too early and don't give our administrators and our teachers enough time to ramp up for synchronous learning and such, then what we end up doing is go full time and then have to pull back not just to hybrid, but full remote. And I think that is a travesty. We all remember what full remote was like, and I don't want to go back there. I think that is personally my bigger fear, is that we put our kids and our teachers back into full remote, and especially at a time when they're going to be entering, grading season. I fear we're going to be having some pretty serious problems at that point. I have a lot of teachers who are reaching out to me saying, vote for consistency, keep hybrid because of consistency. If the district is okay moving forward with this, I'm okay. The challenge I think that I have, besides just the logistics of it all, is also that we have, as Dr. Pate's saying, these variants that are coming into the environment. These variants are very different from what he told me. They target younger people. They're not the older people who are being targeted with the current COVID infection. It's going to be younger people. So we could be facing a very different school district. What I would like to see in this is that we maybe make a firm start date. We don't start earlier than a certain date, but then give the district flexibility just in case those variants are in the community, and they need to be flexible with that. Again, going back to Dr. Pate, who has given us so much good time, I want to make sure that if this is a concern for the medical community, it's a concern for us to make sure that our teachers are safe, yes, because their immunities would also be affected, but also our students who would have no vaccine. And I just do want to make sure that we're not, pulling a trigger that suddenly we're giving a firm date yet again that we can't pull back from, especially at a time when we really do need to be pulling back. So thank you very much for letting me make those comments.
Yeah, thank you. You don't have to. I just wanted to. Trustee Buffy?
Madam Chair, I'm very conflicted. I can basically repeat everything that was said, but I will spare us the time. I want the students back full time as soon as possible, but the operational readiness is a problem, and then of course wanting to give all of the teachers an opportunity to be vaccinated. I do support remote Mondays. That is all I'm very, very confident on, but I could support this plan the way it is, but I also could vote to move the date up. I would be comfortable with that.
Thank you. I'm going to go a little rogue and ask Mr. Heller one other question if I can. A date that's been tossed around, and I thought I heard you say, but I want to confirm it. March 29th, I think, is the date back from spring break. is there a major difference in operational readiness between March 28th and April 9th and 13th, other than the virtual schoolhouse piece?
Madam Chair, Trustees, the virtual schoolhouse piece would be the largest piece of that puzzle. So again, based on that calendar, that clock, you will, in terms of the vaccine, the opportunity to receive, that we feel like that the 29th would be when those folks have had that opportunity for that and the 2 weeks. Again, it's hard because that vaccine has been challenging. So there are folks who still haven't had first dose. But yes, in terms of what the committee came up with in terms of that clock and that calendar, the 29th would be that earliest we could return. The virtual schoolhouse being the one big piece that we wouldn't be able to transition any students until fourth quarter. And that's just a operational challenge of trying to move kids in the middle of a quarter to virtual schoolhouse. So yes, that's the biggest difference. And obviously we won't have all those positions hired, but as I said, we likely won't have them all hired by the 9th or the 13th either.
And I actually have one follow-up if I
Okay.
can. Correct my memory if it's wrong, but I thought we saw a couple hundred kids transfer between virtual schoolhouse and in-person or hybrid in 6 through 12. Is that about right? If I remember right, a couple hundred? It wasn't.
I would hate to go out on that limb because I don't know for sure that there was so much movement between the two. I think that if we expected to see a couple hundred make that transition, that would be what we would anticipate. We don't anticipate it being higher than that, but it's a hard one for us to know for sure. As we've all heard, there's 50-50. There's parents out there who want us back earlier than we already are, and there's ones who are very nervous about coming back at all this year, and those are the ones who potentially could make that transition to virtual.
Thank you. I think I'm going to go if you guys are okay with that. And so first of all, I got to tell you, I'm super excited. We're even talking about getting kids back in school this year for 6 through 12. I mean, we're not talking about if anymore, which we were a couple months ago. We're talking about now when, right? That's our big conversation. To me, that's awesome. We have some risks, right? The variant is one of those unknowns. We don't know what's going to happen. I'm with everybody else. I support remote learning day. Probably for a little bit different reasons, though. We're potentially going to have to pivot back to hybrid or remote after we get everybody back in school. And just using the technology once a week makes sure that we're better at doing that when we do have to do it, because we learned very early on in the year that we need to be used to using it. I'm also 100% supportive of giving teachers the opportunity to have at least the option of getting the second shot and having the 2-week piece. I mean, I wouldn't ask myself to go into a classroom that way, and I wouldn't want to ask them to do the same. And so I support the committee wholeheartedly in that recommendation. I think, folks talked about emotion in this decision, and frankly, emotions on both sides of this topic. It's not just emotion of teachers, it's emotion of students, and we saw a little bit of that tonight. And it's emotion of board members. We all sit in different spots, right? Some of us have kids in younger schools, some of us have kids in older, some of us have kids in college or out in the work world and are having to take risks in different ways. And when it comes to our kids, emotion is probably one of the things that drives our decisions the most. So I'm going to tell a little bit of an emotional story, kind of where I got, because it took me till today to kind of figure out where I was at on this. I drove by my kids' school today midday, and my kids are in elementary school, so they are in full-time. And what I saw on the playground was a much reduced number of kids, but kids being in social interaction. And even though it looked different than it did before, there was a lot of smiling faces. And so what that told me is I really do support getting our kids back in school as soon as safely possible. And we've got a plan in front of us. And if we can do it operationally ready with that vaccine in place, I'd like to do it sooner rather than later. So with that, I think, Clerk Newbold, I have another question. Because we've had a lot of discussion around this, and then we can stop and go through a discussion on other things. Or can we move an action item agenda up in it? Can we change our agenda, I guess, is my question. Okay, thank you. So with that, before I close discussion on this, is there anything else? Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Would anybody like a break? Yes, please. Okay. We'll take a 5-minute break and come back at 7:50. They're on break. Thank you. We'll call the meeting back to order. As with anything in life, there are some mistakes that happen, and I missed somebody on our public testimony list. So I wanted to give that individual an opportunity to testify, just because when you came down here to show up, you should get that opportunity. So with that, there is one person that I did miss. It's Nathan Wall. And Nathan, would you mind coming up? Apologize for missing your name. I checked you off, but I didn't actually call it, so I apologize.
That's good. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Nathan Wall. I'm a sophomore at Meridian High School. So I decided to speak today just to kind of give another perspective about the students, kind of adding to the two students that spoke before me. So I'm a representative on student council. I talked with many of the students about online learning. So I kind of like to talk about my experience with online learning in hybrid, just like how it's greatly increased a lot of my stress. It's like really difficult trying to learn. For example, like in my math class, it's a hard time like to see with being at home. Especially I don't have very good vision. And even though like my teacher's doing everything he can't fix the technical difficulties that come with online learning. And then with Microsoft Teams, trying to turn things in, I've had issues with like formatting and trying to do that. So it's been taking me twice as long to get assignments done. And really, I'm not really enjoying that class anymore because of that. And then with virtual Mondays and being on Team 1, Team 2, I have 2 virtual days in a row. So that's just been kind of hard, especially just like one day after another being online all day, not seeing anybody. And really, I just need to be in person to learn. And just like all the students I've talked to, I don't know about a student that doesn't want to go back full time at my school. And just as high school students, we're preparing for college, and I haven't really seen that happen through the online learning. I haven't been able to see my friends on Team 1 with the hybrid schedule. And we've seen the COVID numbers and cases decreasing, and we've seen the teachers have the opportunity to receive the vaccine. And the students, we want to be back in school, so we're going to follow those guidelines. We're going to wear the mask. We're going to do what we're told so we can be in school, because we'll do whatever it takes to be back. And so I just ask that you please do what's right for everyone and open the schools for those who want to go and give them the choice to learn in person. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can't remember trustees, but I think this is the first time we've had students testify. Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, on any one of these topics, and it's been much appreciated. Before I forget, because Troy will remind me if I don't, please lean into your mic and speak into your mic. What we've heard is some feedback online that it's hard to hear some of the trustees because we're not right up on the mic. So if we can do that. And now we'll close out that discussion topic and move on to the second one, which is the revised superintendent job description, and Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Trustees, Dr. Reynolds. I think Troy is pulling up the draft job description. I just want to briefly talk about this, and thank you to Trustee Buffy. This is a different job description than the current job description. I had sent this to you guys previously to examine that. I think I'll speak for Trustee Buffy, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, but she basically took our current job description along with that white paper that I had sent to you about an effective superintendent, and used some of the language that was in our current job description along with language that was similar in that document, and then really organized it into 4 segments that were described in that effective superintendent: the vision and values, instructional leadership, community engagement, and management and operations. As I stand here, I think it's a good start and a good thing. I'm interested to hear your discussion. I do also, as I talked last time, rewriting a job description is a tedious process, and especially the more people involved, the more difficult and tedious it becomes. And so if this is something you would consider accepting, I'm fine with that. If you wouldn't, I would like you to consider two options. One is we could have a special board meeting that would be a work session, and the whole board could work on hammering the details out and getting it finished. That could be one option. The other option would be to assign myself, Trustee Buffy, and another board member to get together and work this out. I do think time is of the essence as we want to go into the next subject on the superintendent search, that we do need to try to get this done as timely as we can and get going on it and bring something that is ready for your approval. So I would stand for questions.
Thank you. Trustee Kloppenstein.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. I just it's been annoying me, and I apologize. Maybe it's something really small. Do we really need an essential physical abilities with this? It just I've seen some other larger districts, or either other districts, excuse me, in other states, and they don't include this. Is it just a token from the past, or is it really necessary that our superintendent be able to deadlift a 25-pound dead weight, or pulling, pushing, reaching? Is that really?
Madam Chair, Trustee Klopfenstein, I don't know that I'm the foremost expert on job descriptions and requirements, but the essential duties, especially for ADA and disability issues, and what you need to be able to do with or without accommodation is important. I've mostly seen those in there, even some that are further, including one of the example, giving percentage of what time is spent doing what for that case. So I do believe they need to be in there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Trustee Ozuna.
I appreciate the work that Trustee Buffy has done on this, and I also think it's a really good start. And I appreciate the timing and that we need to move quickly. I am in full support of you working with two trustees and coming up with something that can come to the rest of us to look at. I think that would probably be more effective. In my opinion, that would be more effective than us having a work session and going through it as a group.
Thank you. Any other trustee thoughts or questions? Trustee Kofelt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I would support also the having Trustee Buffy and an additional board member work with you to come up with something that then could be brought to the board for approval.
Thank you. Nothing? You got us something in front of us. I am also in support of that option. I think one of the things that I looked at in here, and I didn't get a chance to read it in thorough detail, but there's a couple things around community engagement and involvement that I just want to make sure we've learned this year we emphasize, and so I wanted to be able to go back through this a couple times and look at it. I gave this feedback to Mr. Roberts, but I think I'd just give it so the board's aware, because we don't talk outside of this on it. I liked the structure of the Bismarck job description because it allowed for some really easy evaluation criteria as we go through the performance evaluation process with our leader, so our next leader. Just knowing that trying to get 5 people to align on that, some real clear evaluation criteria and some ability to kind of score on that is really helpful in having that in the job description up front. So the structure allowed for that. What I looked across all the job descriptions, though, is they're really similar. So I think we've got the right content. It's just whether or not we want to mess with the structure or not, and then see where we want to emphasize. So I'd be in support of that option as well. I think I'd ask the board this. So right now, at our last meeting, Trustee Buffy and myself and Mr. Roberts are the 3 contact points. If you wanted a different trustee other than me, that's okay too. So I want to make sure that's clear. I'm happy to do it, but I also want the board to have that option if they want that. So, Trustee Buffy.
Madam Chair, and I would not be opposed as well, since I did draft that. I would not be opposed to another trustee working on it in replace of me. I'm okay either way.
You're not getting out of it. We like your HR expertise.
Thank you.
Nice try.
Kidding. Yeah, nice try. So if there are no other discussion, I want to make sure there's no other discussion on the job description. That just sets us up for when we get to action. Just to about. Is there any other discussion before we move to the next piece of it? Oh, Trustee Kofeld.
Madam Chair, yeah, this is really just clarification. As we continue to go through this and look through the other ones in detail, if we do have things for the two trustees and the district to maybe consider, should we just email those to Mr. Roberts or? Okay.
Yeah. And I believe Mr. Roberts, maybe they're going to sandwich together here, but we've got kind of a timeline, so that might help kind of inform what action we need to take in the action section around that job description piece as well for when something would come back to the board. So we stay within our timeline. Mr. Roberts, is that a good segue into the next piece of the discussion items?
Madam Chair, yes, it is.
Okay. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, trustees, Superintendent Reynolds. I provided to you as well a timeline, and Misty's going to come up and tag team with me during this. But there's another document I provided to you. I don't know if I provided it to Troy for the record, but it's the MOU with the ISBA that describes the details. I've been through it. You guys have already made the motion and approved ISBA, so I think it's just a matter of executing that. But I did want you guys to have it for your record, just so you can know what the expectations are. And I'll have Madam Chair sign that after this meeting so we can execute that. But the main thing I want to talk to you is a draft timeline on the superintendent search that we've put together. I have taken liberty to Misty's draft. She drafted it initially, but then I put some dates specific in there to try to get us targeted down the road. I'm not, these dates I think are decently aggressive, but I do think that there is, as I said, the time is of the essence, and we do need to get moving forward on this, as throughout the country there are openings and applicants that are applying, and we want to have, first shot at the best applicants. So I just wanted you to review that timeline. Basically, with this timeline, we would hope to post this job no later than next Friday, February 19th. We would keep that open for a time frame. In the initial brochure that ISBA has put together, they had March 8th. I had March 12th, which is 3 weeks from that date. Understanding that in a typical application process, and Misty confirmed that with me, all the applications come in the last week. So no matter what we say, they're going to come in the last week on doing that. So I think a 3-week timeline for right now is adequate. And I also, when I added into the language that we would have the option to extend that if necessary, in our control. But I think we need to set, that was my goal there. And then we would go through the process, other things that we would need to do, up to kind of the end of March, April, ultimately, hopefully coming to a decision. I think that a couple things that we need to really talk about, or the board needs to talk about, is the concept in the 4th item down, talking about getting input from staff, from parents, from the community, and what that wants, what the board wants that to look like in the process. And we would need to get going on that, fairly soon after we have the job posted and develop the characteristics that people are looking for in the next superintendent that we've talked about before, and how involved do you want to have that happen. So I really want to open up to you guys to have a discussion on what that piece of it looks like as you work through the process.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. So I think we got two pieces. One, we need to have a board decision on the job description prior to February 19th. Did I understand that correctly?
Madam Chair, that would be my preference.
Okay.
As I spoke last time, if it came rapidly after that, but I would prefer that job description was included with the posting when it goes out, so.
Okay. And then there's a second piece that we need to have some discussion on, and potentially some decision tonight, is around what our stakeholder and community involvement, either planning process looks like or structure looks like. If we're not ready for a full structure agreement today, maybe some potential outside work from a couple trustees to bring back a proposal is also an option in that regard as well. So I'll open it up for some discussion or on either of those, but really probably would like to hear more around the stakeholder engagement and where everybody sits from that standpoint. If there are any thoughts. Trustee Kofelt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I think it's really, really important to have. I've done a little bit of research reaching out to some other districts from where I came from and talking with their superintendent about how they went through with their last process, and I think it's a critical piece. I asked them how they accomplished that. Was it through interviews or surveys? And what they did, and then I kind of took it and I'll break it down specific to us, but they did a survey for the multiple groups. So the executive team, they did a survey of the region directors, they did a survey of the principals, and then this particular district had a superintendent advisory committee, so they surveyed that. So that would be my recommendation, is that we produce those surveys for those different key stakeholder groups. And then obviously the one that's critical too is the one that would go out to the parents, the community.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Trustee Buffy?
Madam Chair, I would recommend another like 2-team trustee to get the survey together, because that's also going to be to develop those questions. It's going to be time consuming, so not it though. I would say Trustee Kofelt and someone else.
Perfect. Trustee Ozuna.
Mr. Roberts, what is our ability to reach community? Thank you, Troy. What's our ability to reach community members outside of the parents that we have emails for? Like, if we're really getting feedback from the community at large, how do we reach beyond our parents?
Well, Madam Chair, Trustee Ozuna, I mean, I think we have the people that we have already. I mean, I think we could be able to reach out directly with the Chamber of Commerce's in the different communities that we serve, maybe the governing offices and that they serve, target specific industries or businesses and see if we can get contact information for those to get information. Well, I don't know. I guess it'd be an interesting data point to know what of our 80,000 parents, approximately, does that already reach in that area? I don't know the data point to that. But I do think we could do some targeted contacts with different segments of the community, for sure. We just have to track down those contacts and try to get them out there.
Sorry, I was just looking to make sure Trustee Kloppenstein didn't want to.
I do have one
Okay.
question, Madam Chair.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you. I was just curious, in terms of timing, do you need surveys before you start going out or during the process of your outreach? Do you
Madam
need the
Chair,
surveys
Trustee
to come back
Kloppenstein, this can be going simultaneously as the application is out. So this is the work we would need to do in preparation for analyzing the candidates that do apply for it. So yeah, it can all be happening simultaneously. It doesn't have to be before the 19th at all. It'll be a process, up to the point that you guys would get to. On the second page, I had, the February, March time period, developing interview questions and things like that. So you're going to, for sure, as the data that I would hope that the data that we would receive out of this feedback would help drive some of our interview questions and specifically some of the qualities and characteristics that we're looking for in our next superintendent.
So really, ideally within February, we need those answers back from the surveys. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think I had, where did I put it in there? I actually had a date. Yeah, March 9th is kind of when we would review those survey results, is what I put as a date for right now.
Excellent. Thank you.
So I actually did spend a little bit of time with ISBA on this topic and asked about kind of what they've seen successfully happen in Idaho in the past. And I think, and Ms. Swanson, if I butcher it, you keep me honest. But there's a couple of things that, as she walked me through some things that happened in a neighboring district to us that were helpful. One is that if we're going to go down the path of having some sort of advisory group, we keep the size smaller, because too big of a group will slow down the process, and also it becomes really hard to get a commonality of the information. There's another one that we talked about. Maybe you can refresh my memory.
Madam Chair, trustees, the only other thing I would add to that is that the board and then any advisory committee members remember that statutorily this is the board's duty to go through this process and to select the next superintendent. Code says that you are the ones that hire the superintendent, and the superintendent hires the rest of the employees, with the board's ratification of those hires. So just that you're not negating your duty as trustees to do the final hiring. I think sometimes it's important to make that clear if you involve, whether it's via survey or advisory groups, that they know what the role is to provide you with input and feedback, but it's not to ultimately give you a rank order of here's our number 1, number 2, number 3 candidate, or that there's an expectation that whoever they narrow it down to, that's who you should hire. The board may feel differently. You may hear from other constituents, things like that. So that was, I think, the other thing that we discussed that I wanted to make sure I mentioned.
Yeah, and I had a third one, which was we really have kind of a couple decision points. One is what kind of stakeholder involvement do we have? Do we have it in a survey? And then I think Mr. Roberts has outlined here in the draft timeline a community interview for the finalists. Do we have an advisory committee that helps us, gives us advice, and looks at the whole application pool before we get to a finalist pool? And one of the questions I asked was, if we decide, which the board can do by Idaho code, interview that larger applicant pool or some sort of subset of that larger applicant pool to get to a finalist, can the advisory group be with us in an executive session? And I want to confirm the answer was yes. So still the board's decision, the board makes the final decision on all of it. But if we did want to do that, there has to be some understanding, though, that information in executive session is confidential, so that group has to maintain the confidentiality, and probably we would have them sign something. So I actually like the idea of a couple trustees coming up with a recommendation around this for the rest of the board at our next meeting on the 22nd. I don't know where you guys sit on that. And maybe 2 different trustees than the 2 that would work on the job description. So. Trustee Kofelt.
Madam Chair, just a clarification. So are you looking for I'm happy to work with another trustee for the survey questions, and are we looking to have those draft survey questions in 2 weeks, or were we looking at that March 9th date?
So I believe the March date is when we would review the results. So we would need to have the questions out sooner. I think there's a couple questions for that if we do a trustee group to answer. One is, what does our entire stakeholder engagement process look like? Is it just survey? Is it advisory group? Is it both? And then I think we probably want to align and just make sure the board's in agreement on kind of even the finalist community staff interview. I think so. It's really around what's our stakeholder engagement throughout the process and the different pieces and parts. It may be just survey questions. It may not. I think we need a recommendation on that. I'd also say I'd probably am more suited to that work than I am the job description work. It's not my expertise. So. Is there any other questions around timeline, kind of the work going on around the superintendent search process? Any other things we want to ask? Because that's a pretty broad category, so this is the time.
Yeah, and I want to talk about a couple other things as well on that, Madam Chair. One is I do think at this time, and I don't know that we have to decide exactly tonight, But we do need to, if we're going to post with any kind of salary information, we need to, make a decision on what that is. ISBA has done some surveys of surrounding states. I think the salary that we currently pay is very competitive. I will say that Utah overall is much more expensive than us, but interestingly with Utah, they only have 40 school districts. Their school districts are substantially larger than ours, but even a couple school districts right in Salt Lake proper that is 20-ish thousand students, that's in the low 2 range. And there was one other school district that was in the mid to high 20s that kind of in a similar range, 230 or something like that. My recommendation, and I don't know that I'm a big fan of putting a range there, but I've seen it in a lot of the superintendent deals that my recommendation would be that we would go somewhere with a 170 to 200,000, depending on experience, kind of range, and I think we're going to be competitive and attract the people we want to attract to the job.
Trustee Buffy.
Madam Chair, I looked at it today too, and I considered cost of labor, cost of living and areas when I looked at the survey results. And I think a 170,000 to even a 190 would be good. I originally had 200,000, but then when I looked at the other superintendent salaries in our state, I know that West Ada is the largest school district, but I thought that based on experience, 170 to 190 would be a really good salary range to start with. So that's my input on that.
Thank you. Any other trustee thoughts? Mr. Roberts, I have a question for you. How common is it for school districts, or maybe Ms. Swanson, one of you, to post the actual salary, or is it typically posted as negotiated?
Do you want to answer that?
Madam Chair, trustees, it's more common that you post a salary, and the specific reason is because a lot of candidates don't know if you're going to be offering $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000, as we're seeing in some of the data from even Utah has some $300,000 salaries. So it is very, very common. The districts that tend to not post the salaries tend to get less applicants because they have no idea. Then they call me, and I don't have any direction from the board to say even what ballpark they're in, or you would be in. So it's more common to post some sort of either salary or salary range than not at all.
Thank you. Trustee Buffy.
Madam Chair, I think that at least if we did a minimum, if the board was more comfortable with that, that would be good, because I don't want to receive applicants and then have them just drop out right in the beginning once they find out what that number is going to be, what ballpark number that's going to be.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Kloppenstein?
Madam Chair, thank you. I was just curious, we're talking about 175 to 200,000 to 190. I'm curious, it's kind of like when you buy a candy bar, right? It's 99 cents. It's really $1. I mean, is there a psychological edge to try to just say the range is a little higher? Just wondering if that might be an idea to pursue.
Madam Chair, Trustee Kloppenstein, I think it is. I think that, but if you put the 2 in front of it, that might be the number for someone with years of experience and a doctorate degree that they may require. With that said, I think you still have to look at the district's budget and what is right for your district as a whole, and if going up to that height is appropriate or not. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question for you.
Is Mr. Gillen still here, or did he have to leave? Can't see. Okay. Maybe we can make part of the trustees that are doing the job description piece also make a recommendation on the salary and work with Mr. Gillen on the budget piece to give us some idea of how that fits into the budget too.
Madam Chair, I think that would be fine.
Okay. What else you got for us, Dave?
So the last thing I just wanted to confirm, part of ISBA's service, And I'd asked questions originally that when we post this application, and I think it's a good practice, and I don't know if all of you received the first kind of draft, it's not finished, of the posting, that we would have all the applications go directly to ISBA. I've talked to Misty about that. I think that's a good practice. I think that Misty can say it better than me, but it protects current staff from potentially being accused of favoring internal candidates, say, versus external candidates and things like that. And so that would be my recommendation as well, that we follow their advice and have the application. We can have a link on our site to the application on ISBA, but that we have it hosted on ISBA's site, and Misty is in charge of collecting those and bringing them forward to the board.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts, do you need a board decision on that, or do you need a board motion on that? Or
Madam Chair, I guess I would ask for, we left that agenda item pretty broad, but I think basically kind of 4 items. One, if you approve of this timeline in general, a motion to have us move forward and meet that. There will be probably adjustments to this, but I want to get that started. The second one is whether you're going to start a committee to discuss the feedback that we want to receive from staff and constituents. 3, as part of that, if you lump that in with a salary expectation, I think that's fine, as long as we do that work, fairly timely prior to the 19th, which is next Friday, so we got to get after it. And then I think the third one is just authorizing, and I don't know if we need a board motion, but I think it would be good to confirm that we would have all applications go through ISBA, and Misty would be the steward of those applications.
okay. If you don't mind, I want to walk back through those, and I maybe want to just add a clarification and see if we're aligned. Approving the timeline in general, if we're going to do some sort of trustee, and Mr. Roberts' recommendation around committee stakeholder involvement, a 2-trustee group around job description, include the salary expectations in it, and then a general authorization around ISBA and collection of the application process. So I had
Madam
4.
Chair.
Is that sound?
Well, the group for the job description was a previous agenda item, as a separate action item, I think, as well on the agenda.
Oh, okay. Oh,
So-
that's right. You're right. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Oh, I think we got it solved, but, I'll look at the board. If we wanted to have Mr. Gillen testify now, I just was wanting to see around if we wanted to have some budget information now, or if we go later on in action and we have him work with the job description group to come back with a recommendation. It's up to the board if you want to ask some questions now, or you want to wait for that.
I'm
Trustee
fine
Oz-
with waiting. I'm doing it as part of that process.
Okay. Thank you for running up the stairs. Appreciate it. Anything else, Mr. Roberts?
Madam Chair, that's all I have.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I apologize. I want to make sure everybody else had something before I ask one other question. There's an item on this schedule around board to determine if it wants to buy national online advertisement. I thought our motion last time included the higher level of the ISBA, so I believe we bought that it included online advertisement up to a certain dollar amount, but I want to clarify that.
Madam Chair, the board did agree to do a national online search, but the advertising cost for that is in addition to the cost and was not included in the ISBA MOU. And that's what Misty talked about last time. I do think Misty has in here and has in the MOU itself postings on American Superintendents Association, AASA, and some other sites. I've gone out and looked at that site, looked at the job postings on there. I do think that gets traffic, specifically in the superintendent world. I think we could look at Education Week, some of those publications. And I think I would anticipate that we do want to do that, and we'll come back to you with specific costs and times on that when we do that.
Okay. Okay. Can I ask one other general question? There's a lot of kind of administrative stuff in this timeline for the board to approve. Would it be easier for the board to approve some appointed people from the board to just help make those decisions, or do we need to approve every one of these individual items kind of as we go through the process?
Well, Madam Chair, I think it would be the board's pleasure, but I think you can always delegate responsibility to the superintendent. They could delegate it to me or our group to make those decisions as we go along if we're generally in favor of this process.
Thank you.
And I'll work with Mr. Gillen on budget items as well.
I do have a little bit of concern with delegating to a current superintendent for around a future superintendent's costs, but I think if we figured out some sort of process around that, maybe that's an option too, or maybe it's a trustee group, something. But Missy, did you have something to add?
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. I believe at your last board meeting that the board did take action to appoint the chairwoman and trustee Buffy as the contacts for the board, as the main contacts for superintendent search. So any decisions such as approving the promotional brochure, or even if you want to buy some ads with AASA or Education Week, the two trustees in charge of the search could do that. It's pretty much the two of you do not have the authority to hire the superintendent alone. But some of the kind of clerical type things, I think the action that the board took last week or last meeting would be sufficient.
Okay. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you. I'll just say if there's any concern with following that process, let's talk about it. If not, let's use that. You guys are good? Okay. Well, then we'll go on to, we're finishing up the two superintendent search items. We have one last item on the agenda. And thank you, Clerk Newbold, for putting some stuff in a binder for the trustees. I wanted to...
And Chairwoman,
oh, yeah, Mr. Kloppstein,
Madam
sorry.
Chair, I apologize to interrupt you. I just want to let the board know that I do have a conflict of interest with this item, and to be very clear, to make sure that it's obvious and transparent that I'm not participating. I'm going to exit the dais until after the discussion. I will be abstaining from the vote. But thank you very much for letting me interrupt.
Mr. Kloppstein, maybe just if you'd help the board on the actual conflict of interest.
The conflict of interest is a contract, and I do have a fiduciary interest in this company.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So what's in the board packet here is some information around kind of what's been going on around communication. But I wanted to actually just open up the conversation because we've went through this year so far. And one of the things that's kind of resonated over and over in either patron feedback or even what the board has said is that we need to figure out some strategies for how to move forward with communication differently. Former Chair Newhoff and the superintendent had the good wherewithal to look at let's look at what we've got in channel communications and where we're at. And I think one of the things I was most surprised by was the level of complexity within our district around even managing communications. So some statistics, 57 websites, multiple social media sites, sometimes one for each school, sometimes multiple for each school. Ability to communicate with 80,000 patrons through email and text communication. There's media communications. There's the technology and sources of truth of the information and how to manage that on multiple websites. I mean, it's a significant amount of communication, so it's easy to understand how we did get some confusion throughout this process, especially with the complexity of COVID. So wanted to kind of open it up for the board discussion. The other piece of this, and you all have a copy of the contract that did a couple pieces of work for the board, for the district, and then some additional availability within the current contract around project work. Former Chair Newhoff and Superintendent Communications Director worked with Red Sky Communications, and there was two pieces of work that I believe are pretty much complete. One was around the channel audit, and the other was around helping the board with how to have consistent messaging around email communications. And so the work of the channel audit, the master messaging, the social media recommendations are in your binder here. There's also the policies that I could find that we have around communications as a district some around media releases, which last was updated in 1994, and some around community relations and communication, which was last updated in 1973. So clearly, social media was not around probably in either one of those times, which means maybe we want to look at these things. And then, so that's one piece, is kind of, is there some direction or thoughts around how the board would want to move forward to start to figure out how we move our communications in a better direction and support our staff in that way? The other thought is around communications with the things that are going to happen between now and the end of this school year, or close to the end of this school year. The board, if I remember right, for this year has had one board communication come directly from the board. And it was just in December, and the superintendent was in the communication with us. We really have not had, as a group, a way to communicate out. We have some opportunity. We did use Red Sky for that one communication. We have some opportunity to go ahead and do that in the future if we need it on an ad hoc basis. It does require the board to access at least either me or somebody to do that administratively. That being said, we also have the ability to use that language or that contract to help support communications planning for the district as well. So that language in there gives some flexibility. So I wanted the board to have that information to think about its asset development and project management. And so wanted to just, I guess, open it up for discussion. I think it's up to the board, but if we feel like communications is right where we want it, then we don't have to do anything different. And if we want to start to move and guide us in a different way, we can do that as well. Tonight, we may have an action on this. We always put an action on there to give that opportunity, but we don't also have to have one. So we'd open it up for discussion. Trustee Kofeld.
Yeah, Madam Chair, and I'm coming in this a little bit later because a lot of this work was done ahead of time. I think sometimes folks patrons can get frustrated if they feel like something is just a cut and paste, and they see the same thing. But the reality is, sometimes that's important to maintain a consistent message, because sometimes when we're using our own personal touch, we may just forget something, so there is a place for that. Just from myself, just starting to evaluate some of this stuff and starting to hear about 57 different websites and things, I mean, that's a massive undertaking to try to maintain a consistent, uniform message. So, I think there does need to be some discussion around this and how do we develop that. And I was hoping, as I read through this, Red Sky, as they did some analysis on the different things, they gave pros and cons, but they didn't really give a recommendation. And I think that would have been nice from like, hey, here's how I would move here, or I would, cut these individual websites down by half, or whatever to help us move forward. So I don't know if perhaps if we chose to use them, they could help us with, okay, we have your pros and cons, but what are some recommendations for moving forward? Because communication's always the Achilles heel in anything. So I guess I say all that, just say I do support us working, and perhaps it's with Red Sky, but working to find ways to streamline this, maybe bring it a little bit under more of one umbrella rather than spread out over 57 different websites, and make some improvements there.
Thank you. I might just, under the asset development and project management portion of this contract, it says that they can provide additional analysis to assist with implementing recommendations provided to West Ada School District. So that gives the flexibility, if that's needed, to help kind of what you were talking about, which is take the pros and cons and turn them into actionable planning, or support that. Is there any other? Trustee Ozuna.
Given that our policies around communication are so outdated, I think that we have a unique Thank you. I'll repeat all of that in the microphone. Given that our policies are so outdated, I think that we have a unique opportunity to update our policies while looking at the results of the communications channel audit and then possibly, even since we're still under contract with Red Sky, loop them into that process to get their recommendations as part of any policy updates. And I think our communications team would have the ability to work direct, if I understand right, they would have the ability to work directly with them to get those recommendations and turn that into a policy that could come back in front of the board, perhaps. One thing with Red Sky, you know, they did work with us on a communication back in December that you mentioned. It might be good for us to consider working with them on communications related to the superintendent search process and the community stakeholder feedback that we're getting. That might be another area. Our contract with them only goes through May, so you know, we need to use that up before then.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, with that being said, I think we'll move on to the next portion of the agenda. Invite Trustee Kloppenstein back up. All right, you guys ready for this? All right, the first action item up on the agenda is the 6 through 12 language schedule and plan. And I'll just kind of, because we have a couple new folks and just kind of reminder, we can take motions, we can have discussion on the motion and then vote on the motion. So we do have an opportunity within there for discussing. We need to have the motion be approved and have a second before we discuss it. So it's just from a kind of procedural standpoint. So with that, I would open the floor for any motions from the board. Trustee Kofelt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'll make a motion to approve the staff 6 through 12 language schedule plan, but amending the start date to March 29th.
Thank you. Trustee Kofelt, is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the staff staff and committee recommendation for the district criteria, as well as amend the date from April 9th and 13th to March 29th. Are we good? Okay. Is there any discussion? Well, actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to let the motion maker just kind of explain first, and then, okay. Why don't you explain kind of your motion first, and then Trustee Kofelt, you go ahead. It's actually kind of proper to give the person who makes the motion an opportunity to explain why they made the motion first, and then let the questions and discussion go. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, as I mentioned earlier in my comments, I would love to move this forward as far as possible, but as I'm balancing some of the challenges that have come to light to me in the last few days with the transportation, the nutrition, and some of these significant and realistic challenges, I don't want to handcuff us where our desire to move this date up actually just creates problems for us. So by making March 29th, my goal was just to move this forward as far as we could and still logistically do it as a district. And so that's my reasoning behind why. I support everything else in the recommendation with the remote Mondays and such, but just moving that date forward.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? Trustee Kloppenstein, I cut you off. I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to go first if you want it.
Thank you. So basically, we'd be looking at the 29th instead of the 5th and 13th?
I believe that, yeah, the 9th and 13th, but yes.
Beg your pardon,
Yeah,
9th and
you're
13th,
good.
excuse me. Would it be possible to have Dr. Reynolds just guide us on this? If there would be a difference at all within the 2 weeks, does it create an impact for staff? And I just want, as the person who, I look to your guidance and leadership, I just want to know if does that create a hardship for staff?
Mr. Staff can't speak after a motion's been made?
Then we're good.
Okay.
My apologies.
Okay.
Okay, so I have to admit, I would frankly prefer to lean on staff. They obviously had a reason for it. And unless there is are we buying an extra week, a week and a half, and does it really matter? In other words, is it going to give us something qualitative, and what would that be? We're getting extra time for students, but in so doing, are we making it harder for teachers? I just want to see the balance of it. To me, it would be I don't see the reasoning behind it beyond just trying to provide an extra week, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Thank you. Trustee Ozuna.
I do support a return earlier if our administration, our teachers are ready for that. So I would prefer to leave it open-ended, that it's this date or that date, with administration to come back to us and let us know whether or not that's doable and what the impacts are. I think that they would need to reach out to their principals and really understand from their teachers, because there are those kids that we know will have to move to virtual schoolhouse that will have to be supported for that couple weeks remotely, and other operational issues that I may not be aware of.
Thank you. Any other? Oh, sorry, Trustee Ozuna.
One other thing that I think that we just need to really clearly state too is that we're watching what's happening over the next couple months, and if things change in our community, if the variant causes changes, if anything happens, that we might need to make a change. I mean, this is something that we need to continue to follow, and I think everybody just needs to know that. I hope that it's clear to everyone. We want kids back in school. We also have a responsibility to kind of continue to watch what's happening.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Trustee Klopfenstein.
Madam Chair, I'm not sure, would it be appropriate for me to make a friendly amendment? Or is it still weird, a discussions phase for this motion?
I think it's always proper to ask, and then let's see if the motion maker accepts. And if not, then we can make an amended substitute, or amended motion.
Yeah, per Robert's rules, as long as we don't pass the original motion, we can just make motions just as a regular motion.
Yeah.
So it's not really up to the motion maker to approve a request or not. It's just up to the board. So we would, in other words, if it doesn't get a second, it doesn't move forward.
Okay, that's different than the Roberts I understood. So, but let's just try and see if he agrees. So.
Okay, well, Trustee Klofeld, would you approve? Would you accept a friendly motion?
Sure.
Okay, very good. So actually going with what Trustee Ozuna is saying, I'd like to amend and make a friendly motion that the district doesn't go, that instead of making 29th our start date, that we don't go earlier than the 29th, but it's up to staff to choose when would be the appropriate time based on conditions on the ground, would be my motion, my adjusted motion.
Clerk Newbold, did you get that motion? Okay. And then is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded that there is a friendly amendment added to the motion that allows staff to make a decision to adjust the date no earlier than the 29th, but can adjust the date for later than the 29th based on operational?
Based on operations or conditions.
Okay. First, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Sorry, Trustee Klofeld.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, my only concern with that is, as we have families and things that are trying to plan, how soon is that decision made? I mean, I appreciate what Trustee Klopp saying, what he's trying to accomplish. I get that, but I'm just concerned at when does that decision get made so the families can plan? That would be my concern with that.
Trustee Klopfenstein.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Trustee Klofeld, my reasoning for this is partly to give administration time, just in case, for instance, for synchronous learning, we don't get all our equipment in time, or there are some training issues. Things are happening, of course, with COVID. Things get delayed. The other thing also is if the variants start coming in, if we have a firm date of the 29th, and we have a variant coming through, that that would obviously mean we wouldn't want to move forward. It just gives them the ability to be flexible to ensure our numbers are down. I mean, obviously, the language of the original motion does allow for that. The language of the plan does allow for that. But as long as we're not setting a firm date and making it flexible, then I think that would give them the power to be able to adjust for some problems that might be unforeseen.
Thank you. Can I clarify something in the motion real quick? Are we giving administration or are we giving the superintendent? And I just want to make sure we have the language clear on who we actually would give that authority to. And if we needed to adjust that, if it was how we do that. Have it as administration? Okay. Yes.
March 29th is a remote day, so possibly.
March 30th?
Yes. I mean, just putting it out there.
Okay.
Mr. Yocum had said that it makes it look better. Because it was remote Monday and then.
Okay, since we have the motions and the amendments moved and seconded, we have a couple options. We can withdraw the motion, one of or both of the motions, and start over, or we can vote them down, or we can vote on them and see what happens. I'm going to look to the two motion makers to see what your preference is first before we decide how to move forward.
I would be happy to withdraw and then resubmit.
Madam Chair, just for clarification on the 29th, 30th date, my motion was to approve the recommendation that was provided to us, including remote Mondays, and start. I know I said the 29th, but with approving the remote Mondays, it seems like that would be kind of an accepted issue that we wouldn't start until the next day, so.
Okay. Okay, so I think what we're saying is on that one, the clarification solves the problem, and on the amended motion, the withdrawal is comfortable to get the superintendent language, or do you want to leave it with administration?
To me, they're kind of one and the same.
Okay.
But basically, obviously Dr. Reynolds is the head of the administration, but if you would like it to change, I'd be happy to withdraw and change that.
I'll look to the clerk to see if we need to have that clarification in the motion. I know. I was hoping, yeah. Sorry. I think I was going to agree, but I thought, well, maybe I'm too sticky. So
No, I formally withdraw my motion.
thank you. Trustee Kloppenstein, would you like to make an amended motion?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So I would like to move that we change the start date to the March 30th. Is that correct?
No,
or
I
March
think we're okay on
29th.
that.
So I beg your pardon. So keep the date as March 30th as the earliest date possible, but allow Dr. Reynolds to choose to choose a later date at her discretion based on conditions on the ground.
Thank you. Is there a second? Trustee Ozuna.
Clarification on that? Choosing a later date, we're really just talking about the 29th or April 9th. Or are you intending with your amended motion to really be open-ended?
I'm intending to be open-ended. The reason being, again, is in case there's a variant that comes through, we have a lot of medical concern about, some concerns about that time frame, and they would just allow for administration, Dr. Reynolds, to have that control if needed.
Thank you for that clarification. Is there a second? Motion dies for lack of a second. Is there any other, I'm going to look for amended motions, or we're going to move to the vote on the first motion. Trustee Ozuna.
I'm going to take a stab at an amended motion, if that's okay.
Please.
To take the committee's recommendation with a return date possible between March 29th and April 9th. Are those, I think I have my dates right. So clearly between those two time frames, because I think that we all know that we're watching conditions on the ground and that we'll have to make changes if something comes up. So I don't want to just leave it open-ended. And I think that we should put some parameters on the timing for the superintendent to come back with a decision on whether or not operationally they can hit the 29th date, so that parents can plan and teachers can plan and our students can be prepared.
I think we're going to have to work that into a motion. I'm looking at the clerk.
That was too much talking.
So maybe if I can help you. So I think the motion is to amend the original motion to make the date periods between March 29th and April 9th and 13th, because we need the middle school date in there. And then the superintendent would have blank date to let the board know or form the community, whatever you want around the decision. If Okay, so you make the motion. I just want to make sure we got all the pieces and parts. Yes.
So the friendly amendment is to accept the recommendation from the committee with the return date between March 29th and April 9th, with a decision on that to come back from the superintendent at our next board meeting. Get it all?
I think so. It's a lot. I want to make sure the clerk got that. Right? You good, Sherry? Yeah.
Yes, and you wanted to, excuse me, you wanted to include that April 19th, is that in there as well?
The April 9th and the 13th? Or
And the 13th, excuse me.
you want both dates or just the 9th date?
Oh, yeah, both are fine.
Thank you. Okay. Is there a second? The friendly amendment dies for lack of a second. Is there any other amended friendly amendment motions? All right. Well, we have an original motion with a second on the table. Clerk Newbold, I apologize for doing this to you, but can you read us the motion just so everybody knows what they're voting on?
I will try.
Okay, the motion on the table is Trustee Caulfield approves the staff language amending the dates to March 29th.
Thank you.
Second by Buffy, Trustee Buffy.
Thank you. All right.
Are we good?
Thank you very much. All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, please say nay.
No, nay.
Thank you.
I was going to sneak in an aye and you went too fast.
Oh, you can sneak it in. You can sneak it in now.
There you go. Aye.
Thank you. All right, the motion carries 4-1, and we will look to administration to let us know how it's going at our next meeting. So thank you all very much for your time and for all the work, and for those who participated in the committees. It was a lot of work, and we appreciate all of the input that we received, including those that testified today. Next up on the actions for the board is the revised superintendent job description. And just kind of refresh the board's, because we've gone through a lot of stuff tonight, the board's memory on this one. I think our discussion was around how we wanted to move forward with the superintendent job description. If we wanted to have a couple trustees take and work with Mr. Roberts and come back with a recommendation towards the board, or if we wanted to have a board work session to get those completed. So we need to have that in action. And then the other thing is, I think we need to also set a date based on the timeline so that we get that done in the timeline that Mr. Roberts needs. And I believe we need to have that recommendation back before the board. I'm going to look at Mr. Roberts and see if he'll shake his head if I get it wrong, but by February 19th. Yes. since I know I can open up discussion before we have a motion, I want to make sure that if we do this, that the board either decides tonight on the date later, or or it's in the motion. So we can do either one of those, but if we do make a motion for either one of these options, we need to pick a date. So we get moving, because it's February 19th is next Monday, I believe, or next Thursday, something around there, so. All right, is there any motions? Or is there a question before we get to motion?
I did have a question.
Go for it.
You stated earlier that you thought you'd be more suited for the community engagement conversation, so I just wanted to ask Trustee Klopfenstein if he would be available to help work on the superintendent job description before I considered a motion there. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Before we go into motions, any other questions? All right, motion is always in order. Trustee Ozuna.
Chairman Johnson, I would move that we move forward allowing Trustee Buffy and Trustee Klopfenstein to work directly with Mr. Roberts on the superintendent job description, and that they come forward with a request for a special meeting when that work is done, and that their conversations include a discussion around the salary recommendation and working with Jonathan Gillen on that.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Trustee Klopfenstein. Clerk Newbert, are we good on the motion? Okay. Is there any discussion? I like this motion. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes 5-0. The next item up on the agenda for action is around the superintendent search, and I think Mr. Roberts walked us through the actions needed on this. He asked for, in general, for the timeline to be approved for the board, from the board, that if we're going to do some decisions around committee stakeholders, that be identified in the motion. And I think we determined that we don't need to do any authorization from ISBA. We've made that in the last motion before the board. So I'm looking to Misty or Mr. Roberts, but I think, okay. So the two action items that we're looking for in this motion at least is something around the community stakeholders and then the general approval of the timeline. Trustee Buffy.
Madam Chair, question.
Go for it.
What is the date for the community engagement piece? Is there a deadline that we also need to identify?
Mr. Roberts, is there a specific date that you need that recommendation back by?
Madam Chair, Trustee Buffy, I mean, we need to back up from March 9th, if that's a time we need to do that. So, you know, that Monday before or something.
Okay. Could we do our next regularly scheduled board meeting on the 22nd? Would that be okay, too? Or the 23rd, sorry, at the 23rd.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Trustee Klopfenstein.
I beg your pardon, and actually it's not on this motion, but I do have just a question. Do we want to schedule in a special meeting? Because I believe we have for the 19th, is that correct? That the description needs to be, the job description needs to be submitted, and that'd be before our next regular meeting?
Yes, so there's two pieces to, so on the job description motion that just passed, the motion that passed actually asked that group to let us know what a special meeting date we needed to call once they got the job description at work. So then on this one, we have the opportunity to do our next regularly scheduled board meeting if we want, or if somebody prefers something different, we can, but I think that one gives us the options. We don't have to schedule a special meeting for this one. Yep. Are there any motions? Trustee Kofelt.
Madam Chair, just a quick question. In this one too, are we looking for trustees to work on these survey questions, and so that those names would have to be, okay.
That would be preferable.
Without just grabbing somebody, I'm happy to do it. I don't know if anybody else is. And
I think look to trustees to say, I mean, I'm happy to help on the community stakeholder piece, but that's up, I mean, I also don't want to take it if somebody else wants it, so. Okay. You got some info for you.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the draft timeline that was presented this evening for the superintendent search, and that also Chairperson Johnson and Trustee Kofelt work with Mr. Roberts on establishing stakeholder input surveys and bring that back to the board at the February 23rd meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Trustee Buffy. Is there any discussion? All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Chair votes aye. The motion passes 5-0. The last item on our agenda is the board communication strategies, and I would look for any questions before we get to motions. Okay. Is there any motions? Trustee Ozuna.
I have a couple thoughts around this one. Should I do it in 2 motions or just kind of give it all my thoughts in one?
It's up to you.
Okay, I'll just put them out there. So around this one, again, with the policies being so outdated around communications, first part of my motion would be to have the communications team work with Red Sky on some recommendations out of their channel audit and use that to kind of bring a draft of the couple communication policies or any new policies that we might need to have back to the board. Second part is to give authorization to the board chair to use Red Sky until the end of the contract as needed on board communications or as related to the superintendent search.
Thank you. Clerk Newbold, you good on the motion? Okay. Is there a second? Trustee Kofelt.
Madam Chair, I'll second it.
Thank you. The motion's been seconded by Trustee Kofelt. Is there any discussion? Thank you. I just want to say I think that I'd love to see this partnership with the communications department and the Red Sky and really actually look forward to figuring out how we move this in a direction and appreciate the staff's time on doing this. So is there any other discussion before I go for a vote? All right, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
The chair votes aye. The motion passes 5-0.
Beg your pardon.
Oh, sorry, 4-0. Oh, sorry, any abstain? That's what I should ask.
Abstain, thank you.
I didn't verbally hear it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, motion carries with 4 ayes, 0 nays, and 1 abstention. Thank you. Sorry about that. Is there, all right, the last item on the agenda is adjournment.
So moved.
It's been moved by Trustee Klopstein. Is there a second? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Chairman votes aye, and the motion carries. The board's adjourned.